Good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's March 2nd, 2023. I want to welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Board of Finance. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, and to the republic
for which
it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, to the members of the public who've dialed in or joined us on the WebEx tonight, please know that you're muted, will not be heard by board members, and there will be no live public comment until called for during the meeting. Members of the public are always encouraged to send their comments and questions in writing to the board at bof@fairfieldct.org. If you do so, please remember to include your name and address for the record as you would with live comment. Tonight is a special meeting because it was rescheduled from last night when it was originally scheduled to occur. During our last meeting on February 21st, I kicked off the meeting making reference to a number of open items that we've been discussing over the last couple months, including some requests for information from this board. We will cover all of those items tonight, either through individual agenda items or committee updates. So let's move right into item 3. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Approving the Reallocation of Surplus Proceeds for Projects Previously Approved for Bonding Authority." Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. Curley, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Thank you. Okay, so the full text of the resolution was provided in advance of the meeting, and it's included in the posted backup beginning on page 2. The detail of the proposed reallocation is included on page 3. The town CFO, Mr. Schmidt, and Controller Ms. Bossi are here to walk us through this item. And Attorney Staffstrom from Pullman and Comley, whose firm assisted the town in pulling this together, is also here for questions. I will turn it over to whichever one of you would like to kick this off.
Caitlin, you want to start it off?
Sure. As Lori alluded to, this has been kind of a project that's been ongoing for a while. What we're trying to do is kind of clean up some of our old capital projects. So that's what we're attempting to do here. Basically, there's projects, dating back to, if I look at the earliest authorization, some of them go back to 2003, believe it or not. So about 20 years. It's a combination of school projects. As you guys know, those take a while. We can't close them out until they get audited by the state. Some of them are pretty straightforward with just the balances being what's remaining between revenue and expense, revenue being the bonds that have been issued. A lot of these amounts are smaller in nature. A lot of it's just due to rounding, because when we do issue bonds, we basically round to the nearest 5,000. So some of these you're going to see are under dollar amounts. So it just makes sense to just kind of take whatever's left, either a small deficit or a small positive, and net them all out to zero. And then what you're going to see on the Exhibit A is there's a net effect of about 1.6 million when you look at all of these capital projects. So I've worked very closely with Pullman Comley over the past number of months on and off with Jessica, who is one of John's staff members, who's been excellent. And we looked at this every way you could look at it, from the authorized amount, when we issued bonds, when the expenses happened, when we received grants. So we went through every project extensively to make sure we had all the facts straight, so that we, in fact, were doing the correct thing with what was left, to understand what was left, why it was left, and now closing out all of these projects so that we can now take them off our books cleanly. Audits have all been done at the state level. Everything's been done for these projects, totally closed out, no more expenses. So we're ready to move forward. There's about as you could see on the exhibit. I don't know, about 15 or so projects, which gets us up to, just to give you a little bit of background, and then we can go into actually Exhibit A in a little more detail. We have 2 ongoing audits right now with the state, and they are, just to give you some sense of what happens, they date back to fiscal 10. Fairfield Woods is currently in audit, and the Ludlow expansion. Fairfield Woods was actually authorized in 2010. Expenses have been done since 14, and the Ludlow High School expansion was authorized in fiscal 13, and the expenses have been done since 19. Just to give you a feel for where the state is in their auditing. So it does take a long time, and I know it's frustrating to keep seeing these projects on here that I keep saying are closed, but until the actual audit is done, we can't close them. And in fact, some of these, as we're going to go through, we've received the final audited amount from the state years after we were done bonding, because we don't really know what the state's going to give us. You know, we're basically at a 20 to 25% reimbursement rate, but until that audit is done, we don't have the exact figure. So that's what some of these schools kind of represent on here. As you can see, the surplus is the 1.7, and then there's a couple things that were in a deficit of like 91,000. So it nets out to a 1.6. So again, I've been working with Coleman Conley, and then what we're doing here is allocating that $1.6 million to an open project. So we need an open project to say, where haven't we issued $1.6 million in bonds? And the kind of the biggest one and the easiest one, it was the air conditioning project that you guys just approved in May for the schools, which was that $22 million authorization. So that's what this, in fact, this Exhibit A is doing. So I don't know if we do you want me to go line by line through Exhibit A, or John, if you want to talk about the technicalities about what we're doing in terms of bond counsel's perspective, that might give him some background.
Sure. Let me just add to what Caitlin said. We have done this periodically with the town. I think the last time we did this was in 2015 or 2016. And we actually evaluate each project, and we see if the project sort of not overspent the appropriation, but overspent the bond authorization because maybe excess grants were received or something else. And we also look to see if there's any money left. So we worked with Caitlin on these projects and a few others that did not have similar issues. And what you really have before you is a list of projects where these are projects that have already been bonded so that there are excess bond proceeds. We're not talking about projects where there is an authorization that may need to be deauthorized. We're talking about projects where there were actually bond proceeds in place. So what do you do with those? Fairfield and all of our other clients run into the same issue. When this happens, you then need to say, okay, we've got the bond proceeds, we've raised the money, what do we do with them? So we worked with Caitlin on this to identify where there were too much proceeds for a project, and in some cases a deficit of proceeds. Again, not appropriation, because the town can never spend more than the appropriation you've approved. But sometimes you approve an appropriation and then there's grant funds. So what you'll see here is you'll see the excess proceeds were applied first to a couple of smaller projects that were running a deficit from the bond authorization perspective, not from the appropriation perspective. And then that left us at the end with over $1.6 million of excess bond proceeds. And Caitlin and Jared decided to recommend to you that it be applied against the project you approved for the air conditioning project, which would mean in the case of the air conditioning project, the town will now not have to go out for new bonds for the 1.645, because we're going to take bond proceeds that are already in place and reallocate them to that project. And I just point out that our clients all periodically go through this. This is what happens when you've got a number of projects. I'll just point out, in the case of a place like the city of Bridgeport, you can imagine what this is like. But anyway.
Okay. Thank you very much to to both Ms. Fossey and Mr. Safstrom. So just so we all understand the schedule and the sign convention here. So a bond proceeds surplus indicates that the project was, I'll say this term loosely, under budget from a bond perspective, either because we spent less or we got a grant, right? So a positive number here is the project was kind of under budget from a bonding perspective, and then the opposite for a negative. So for something like, and I'll open it up to the board, but just so that we understand how the numbers work. So for something like repair and restoration of Penfield Pavilion, where that shows a negative 73,000. If that's not an overspent authorization, what is that? Because it seems like a lot to be rounding. What causes something like that?
So in terms of that, just to give you some examples, so it was a $7.4 million authorization to rebuild Penfield. The bond authorization was actually $5.5 million, and if you guys remember, there was an insurance check for $1,750. So we had total revenue. So we bonded the full 5.5. We received the insurance money, so the total revenue was $7,250,000. The actual spent was $7,323,000. So it was $73,000 less than the insurance and the bond proceeds put together.
Okay, it was less.
So our expenses were more than our revenue.
More. Okay. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But how does that, and just to, again, to clarify, how does that mean we didn't exceed an authorization then?
So the authorization to spend was $7,447,000. We spent
Okay.
$7,320,000.
Got it. Okay.
So to just clarify what I said before, you in no case here did any of these projects expend the appropriation that had been approved by the board. Okay, as you recall, what we do is a two-step process. You approve an appropriation, which may be higher than a bond authorization. Okay, I think in this particular case, the grants and other money came in less than we expected, although the appropriation was less. So what you're in effect doing here is you're increasing the bond authorizations by reallocating these funds to make up the deficit. But again, from proceeds of bonds that were already raised for another project. Is that fair, Caitlin?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you very much for that. Let me turn it over to the board. Mr. Mottola, do you want to?
I got it. Yeah. Mr. Walsh has a question. I saw his hand up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Am I going? All right. So this is to Caitlin or Jared. This $1,645,000. We're taking money from bonds we've already brought in and reallocating them. How does that affect the waterfall going forward with the air conditioning projects? And does the Board of Education now get to spend an additional $1,645,000 on additional air conditioning? Because now I'm confused on how that whole process is going to lay out and happen, because that's not personally what I want to do.
Caitlin, do you want me to answer that?
John, you can. Go ahead, and then I'll add on.
This money actually, if you transfer it, will be applied, Jim, against the air conditioning project, therefore reducing the further bond authorization for that project by the $1,645,000. So this is not an add-on. We are not increasing any appropriation here. We're just saying if you've got an appropriation of, I think it's around $22 million, we're giving you, we're moving 1.645 to that now, which is going to reduce the future bonding for that project.
Okay. And I like that answer. I just want to make sure everybody on this board and the town understands, and the Board of Education understands, that that does not free up another $1.645 million just because there's the ability now in the waterfall. Is everyone clear on that? Because I just want to, I just want everyone to be aware of that, because I just don't want people thinking now that, oh, this just freed up additional money. Okay, I see everybody shaking their head yes.
Yeah. I guess I would just say, I mean, I think technically it does free up capacity. It doesn't mean that we choose to spend that additional money, right? But if this reduces the amount of bonding that we're going to have in the future, it's going to reduce the level of bonding that's in the waterfall, thereby increasing the theoretical capacity we have. That, I think what you're saying, Mr. Walsh,
I think
is
I'm
that
saying that
doesn't
correctly.
automatically transfer into a decision to spend that money. But it does in fact, free up capacity, which would translate into less bonding, less debt service, or, another project may arise, whether at the Board of Education or whatever, that, that the town may decide to put before us, but nothing automatic, if I'm understanding what your question is.
Okay, I think we're on the same page. I just,
Let me clarify my answer. My answer was that the Board of Education can't spend the existing authorization plus this money. That's not a
Right.
question related to the waterfall, but they clearly the existing authorization, this in effect is the initial bonding under that initial authorization.
okay, I understand, and I think we all understand. And Ms. Charlton, what you were saying, I guess, is it frees up capacity. I understand that. So I think we're on the same page, that yes, it does free up capacity if we wanted to spend it.
Right.
But we're not, this doesn't automatically mean that the Board of Education can spend an additional $1,645,000 that's going forward the way they have it on the waterfall. They're just going to have to adjust the waterfall now.
Correct. The waterfall will be adjusted, and we do have an update on that capacity schedule from Mr. Schmidt that we can briefly look at later. This will free up capacity. There is excess capacity for emergencies or additional projects or whatever else. The capacity question obviously doesn't mean that, there's free money around that we wouldn't, go through the same process to vet and spend any projects that come before us. But yeah, this would in fact lower the debt service on the waterfall, which in the absence of anything else happening would lower the debt service in our budget. So yeah. Thank you.
Do you want me to see if there are any other questions of board members?
Yeah, go ahead. I can kind of.
Can you
It's
see?
funny, unless someone's talking, the screen shrinks to a little box and I can't see. So I see Ms. Leclerc now, but yeah, John, if you can moderate, that's great.
I think, go ahead, Ms. Leclerc.
It's just a quick clarification of what we just said to make sure I understand. So this air conditioning project that we're allocating these funds to, we've already approved it. Now we just won't go out and bond the money. We're going to use these already authorized bonds to spend the money.
Let me go to Mr. Testani first. I think his hand's up.
Yeah, I just want to dovetail off that. Maybe this is a question for John, but or Caitlin, whoever, the 1645, can we get, and I know, in fact, Lori, I think you mentioned it as well. It obviously makes sense that the water for Board of Ed, right, is going to be, should be reduced by this amount, correct? Did I follow that line correctly? That's A. B, can we then therefore get a revised waterfall showing that the 1645 has been subtracted?
Yeah, and maybe it's a question of how Jared wants to present it. I think what we call the waterfall, the actual waterfall is that financial model that shows the projection out of debt service. Sometimes we use waterfall interchangeably to refer to the schedule of future capital projects. So from my perspective, I don't think that would change from the Board of Ed, for the Board of Ed, because they're actually going to spend this money, right? So that'll still stay intact, I would assume, in their project, but then there'll be an adjustment where that project will not flow directly into the waterfall model because we don't need to bond as much. I mean, so Jared, I don't know how you'll, if that'll be notated manually or something, but that's effectively what I think.
Once, assuming that this gets approved, then we would make an adjustment to the waterfall because it is going to reduce our debt service over the long run, and that's going to translate into freeing up capacity, as Ms. Charlton said. And so there'll be, we'll make a decision about how that's gonna, how we want to reallocate or accelerate or, whatever we want to do with the waterfall at that point. It may be that we move a project up or, but, that'll happen once this gets passed. But, yeah, there's no commitment that it would necessarily affect either WPCA, Board of Ed, or the town's capacity.
Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a few questions. So sticking with this point, if I heard everyone correctly, and I'm going to use a round number on the air conditioning project that we previously approved just to keep the math simple, but if we previously approved $24 million for that, and now if I heard correctly tonight, we're going to transfer 1.645 to that project, but we're going to reduce the previous authorization by 1.645 so that we get back to the same $24 million number, to Mr. Walsh's point, so that the Board of Ed cannot spend more than that 24 million. I guess I'm questioning why not just retire these previous bond authorizations, reducing them by the 1.645 and leave the air conditioning project at its original amount, since that's where it's going to end up anyway.
Would you like me to weigh in on that?
Yeah, no, that's, I think, Craig, first, I don't think we said, and Mr. Staffstrom can correct me if I'm wrong here, this doesn't affect the amount that we authorized for the Board of Ed air conditioning. It simply, so the authorization stays the same. We just don't have to bond as much money to fund that authorization, right? And as far as your question about retiring the old authorizations, again, Mr. Sasser, jump in here. I'm assuming it's because we already have the cash in hand. We bonded this money. We have cash that we issued bonds for. So we will be now applying it toward this new air conditioning project rather than bonding incremental amounts, if that's helpful.
Correct. What we're in effect doing is we're in effect saying, use your round numbers, Mr. Curley, we have a $24 million authorization. We have 1.6 million in round figures already on hand. So we're applying that 1.6 against the 24, thereby, by the way, reducing the authority to issue bonds under any other projects, which again are all completed, so that would never happen anyway. So we're taking that 1.6, applying it against the 24, and then the remaining authorization to issue bonds for that project would be 22.4 million.
So we are reducing the authorization.
Well, you're not actually reducing the authorization. The authorization stays in place. But what you're saying is we've already, in effect, issued $1.6 million of bonds for this project. We didn't specifically.
So the remaining capacity is 22 and change.
That's great, 22.4.
Okay.
So we're taking.
That's a good clarification.
Yeah, because we have the proceeds on hand already, so we're not going to bond for it again. We're going to just apply them against this project.
Understood. Okay, thank you for that clarification. That connects the dots. Okay, I have a couple follow-ups on to the start of this, Ms. Bossy. Again, thanks again. You're always presenting in a lot of detail, and I appreciate it. If I heard you correctly, I'm looking at this Exhibit A as kind of the uses side of the equation. What you talked about at the start was more of the sources, where you went back to as far as 2003, looked at some old projects and authorizations, and kind of cobbled it all together to come up with this 1645, and then you figured out how we were going to use it. Do you have any detail about the where the 1645 came from that you can share, or is that just too much tedium to get, or detail to get into?
So the Exhibit A, I think Lori said it's page 3, really breaks out. So the 1.6 is really column 2, just added up.
No, maybe I misunderstood then.
You want to
Okay. All right. So we've got these projects, and I guess I was looking at, or picking up the comment that you made that some of these projects go back to 2003. Do any of these projects on this list go back to 2003?
Yes. Let's see, the one, the Metro train station goes back to
Okay.
03.
Okay.
So that's the oldest one that we still were kind of reporting as kind of open per se because of these bond proceeds. The latest one probably is issued in 15. Osborne Remediation and clearly Penfield Pavilion are probably the newest on this sheet that we're saying now are completed.
Okay. And thank you. One of the other comments that you made was that you can't go through this exercise until the audits are complete, even if construction's been completed for several years, right?
Correct.
I imagine this was a fairly exhaustive task to pull this together. But I guess my question is, coming out of this, would there be a process improvement opportunity where if we know that once an audit is complete, we just make it within the next 6 months, just go ahead and go through this exercise, but it's 1 or 2 projects at a time instead of it becoming a bigger task?
Yes, I've been working with Jessup Pullman, and with every OS that we're now issuing, every time we have a bond issuance, we're keeping a close eye on this authorized but unissued list, which is basically this list of capital projects going forward. So we're really on it. The 2 that I said are in audit now, it depends on how they end up in terms of the audit, because if there's a deficit, it's probably easy for me to go in and say, okay, Board of Finance, can you now approve this deficit? But we need a project to offset it. So we somehow have to come to an agreement that, yeah, we either are in a deficit or we have excess funds, and where are they going to go? So I think we would like to do this more frequently, maybe every year as these things, because like I said, these state audits, and a lot of these are schools. 1.2 of this 1.6 that is on Exhibit A are from schools. And
Yep.
they're from schools where the audit's finally complete. Like Stratfield is probably the largest one, I think, on here. And just to give you a sense, so Stratfield, that was authorized in 8 and 9. Sometimes the design is authorized, but then the construction. We basically received the payment from the state in fiscal 18. So even though they audit it, it takes a while to audit. We go back and forth with them, and we sometimes get a wire transfer 6 months after that. So nothing really happens that quickly. The 2 audits that are ongoing now, I believe, started about a year ago. And we're still waiting on the state to come back to us with their final audit to either say, yeah, we're going to give you X number of dollars, or God forbid, but we owe you, So we hope to clarify, get this done on a more timely basis, maybe once a year, and bring everything that has happened in that year closed out, because that would make my job a lot easier. We could take a lot of these projects off of the OS in terms of the authorized but unissued, and out of our annual report as an open capital project. The next thing that I haven't delved into yet, which I think Jess isn't looking forward to either, mine is looking at our smaller capital non-recurring projects by project, and seeing where we are with each project to figure out, if there's excess funds by project, because that's how we get them approved, by project, and then by year, in terms of it's a 20-year bond, 10-year bond, 15-year bond. And I'm going to have to work closely with Pullman in that case to make sure that we're staying, I think 15 years have to stay within 15 years, and so that we're not crossing our bond issuance, years as well. So that's kind of on our list to do at some point as well. So this does not include capital non-recurring projects, which are those projects under $1 million, over 100,000, but under $1 million. So that's kind of on our to-do list too. But this, I think we have a good process going forward in terms of our capital projects.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
let me,
on
let,
this, on the Stratfield project, for example, you know, I get it, old projects, but if that was resolved in 18, that was still 5 years ago. So I definitely think that trying to shoot for an annual cycle on this type of cleanup would make a lot of sense.
let
Okay.
me, let me,
Yeah,
let me
so
just, let me just add,
go ahead.
particularly on the school projects, all of our other clients are experiencing the same issue. The Department of Administrative Services has been so far behind on school audits. And the money that's forthcoming, for example, again, I hate to go back to Bridgeport, but Bridgeport had to actually issue grant anticipation notes because the money wasn't coming and they had to pay their contractors. You're not in that position. And in a case like the train station project, where you've got lots of different grants coming in from federal sources and state sources, it does take a while sometimes to sort this out. I do agree with Caitlin that we should be doing this on an every 2 or 3 year process instead of every 5 or 6 years. And the list would be smaller, but you'd be cleaning it up more quickly.
Right. And one last question. You talked about not being handcuffed and not being able to take action until the audit's complete. Those audits apply to any project where we have potentially state reimbursement, correct? It's not limited to education projects. Okay,
Correct.
great. Thank you. I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Ms. Marmion, you had a question?
Thank you. I have a question in terms of the administration, the choice of allocating these funds towards the debt service for the air conditioning project. And it may make sense to me because you mentioned that 2/3 of the projects in column 1 were school-related, and air conditioning is school-related, and also, obviously, the big chunk of change, 24 million, in terms of the bonding, and let's try to take a bite out of that apple. But I'd love to hear kind of more rationale, or were other projects considered, and how was the decision made?
Yeah, I could do that, Jared, if you want. Believe it or not, in the projects, I know it seems like we have a lot of authorized but unissued. There was not a lot of projects that had at least 2 million that I felt as though that was a clear bonding opportunity, due to the fact that we have a number of bridges, let's just say, and those are 80-20 splits. Do I know exactly how much we're going to get for the feds and how much our piece is? A lot of them are school projects. And again, I don't want to be in the same position where I'm allocating bonds to a school project and then the audit comes in and now I have too much money again. So this was an easy project because of the large authorization, because of the large open authorization. And again, a lot of these proceeds are coming from the school side, so it made sense. And I looked through a lot of the projects, and, you know, a lot of them we bonded a whole bunch from our May bonding package. I don't know if you remember. So we bonded a lot of our newer projects already. So there was not a clear-cut other project that had, in my opinion, at least 2 million that I felt comfortable that it could easily say, we don't need this 2 million. I knew we were going to bond 2 million in the near future. So that was kind of the thought process behind picking that project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Mr. Walsh, you had a question?
Yes, to Mr. Staffstrom. John, we can't take the $1.645 million and pay down the bond, correct? Because we have a specific agreement on those bonds of what our payback schedule, correct?
Could you take the 1,645 and use it to pay down existing bonds?
Yeah, the bonds where they came from. This money came from.
You could do that. It's probably not the most cost-effective thing to do, since you know you're going to bond for the other project anyway, and therefore reducing the bonding for the other project. But if you've got excess proceeds, you can always, by saying paying that down, you could take the 1,645 and put it into the general fund and apply it against the bonds that are coming due in the next year if you wanted to, for example. It's not what we recommend to our clients that they do, since you've issued the bonds and you've got projects that are out there, particularly since the interest rate is now going up on the issuance of bonds. You're better off using this money to reduce the authorization rather than going into the market with a higher interest rate.
Okay. I get that. I just want to lead that into my next question. When are the bonds going to be issued for the air conditioning project? What's the approximate date for that? What's the first bond we're going to be issuing for the air conditioning project?
It already was.
Okay. So we have issued the bond already. So we have that money right now in our account?
Part of it. Part of it, right?
We
It's
issued
going,
$1
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
We issued about $1 million in this past issuance out of the 22.
Okay, so now we'll have $2.6 million. When is that going to be spent? As planned.
That's, well,
I believe it's over a,
we'd like to support our issue with our cash flow. So, and the next issuance, from what, Jared, unless you have other information, I would imagine we would go back to the school and say, you know, what other schools, I believe they gave an itemized school listing, I believe, when the 22 was authorized, as to what schools they were doing when. So that would be a conversation I would think that we'd have with the schools and where they are in their HVAC whole process.
I guess my
yeah,
question
I'll
is.
just jump in. We actually do have a cash flow schedule, and Mr. Walsh, you might remember this. I think that we got this during the capital workshop meetings, but we may have also got it during our broader capital planning workshop for the full board. So basically, the Board of Ed gave us two versions of their capital plan. One was on an authorization basis. So last year, we'll ask you to authorize $22 million in fiscal '23. But that's a project that's going to take 3 years to complete. So the cash flow and the bonding will happen over a 3-year period. And they actually gave us another schedule where they split that out by year. So I don't recall how the dollars flowed, but we actually do have that. And it had the bulk of the dollars, I think, were in the second 2 years. So there was a small part in year one for design, et cetera, and then the larger parts were in the next 2 years. I'm not sure if that's helpful.
And I agree that that's kind of my recollection, I just don't know, but now we're going to have $1 million that we just bonded that's sitting in our account right now, correct? And now we're going to add $1.6 million that's sitting in our account. So we'll have $2.6 million just sitting there, right? And
Talking about revenue in that fund, yes, bond proceeds.
Bond proceeds, yes. The money, the bonded, the proceeds from the bond. We'll have $2.6 million, correct?
A capital project fund, yes.
But we're not going to be using that fund. My recollection is that the planning and stuff was like $1 million. It's probably why you bonded $1 million, correct? Because you wouldn't over bond.
I believe $1 million because that's what they said they would need this year, yeah.
Yeah. So now we'll still have that $1.6 million not doing anything for a while, probably for at least another year, correct?
Well, we're issuing in July, so I wouldn't say another year, and we would talk to them. If there's a schedule that says how much cash they need, clearly they normally do these things over the summer, but I would imagine we would ask them what their schedule says and how much cash do they need.
Okay. I guess my question comes down to, in having now some special meetings coming up regarding Penfield, should we just hold this amount back for right now? And this way, if we decide to move forward with the Penfield project that needs money immediately, we could then just use this 1.6 towards that. And this way, just put this off for a month or two until we see what the town bodies want to do. Does the finance department have a recommendation in that regard?
so, I'll just say that working with John and Caitlin, John working with Jess, that, we were comfortable with this recommendation and knowing that the project payments are going to happen, fairly soon. It's not going to be a year. There's going to be another year's worth of payments that they're going to start making as the construction continues. So you're talking about a relatively small period of time, and so I'm comfortable going forward with this recommendation. when will Penfield happen? I guess that's to be determined. We know that the school HVAC system upgrade is moving forward, started this year, and is going to continue into the future.
Okay, does putting this off for 2 months, say 60 days, does that cause a problem one way or the other?
Can I just jump in? I mean, I'm not sure it causes a problem, but I would just point out two things. One, I think, and I think my recollection is the same as Jared and Caitlin's, although we can certainly validate it. We bonded the first small piece for the air conditioning last year, which was design money that I assume is being spent now. The project, I think, was scheduled to happen this summer and next summer. So the bigger parts of the second 2 years of the bonding for the air conditioning will happen this summer. And we do have a substantial amount of money already set aside for remediation in Penfield. And frankly, even if we were to approve that project tomorrow, we've got quite a bit of cash that has been set aside from surplus funds, et cetera, that can certainly take us, if not the whole way through the project, can carry us through immediately. So, I mean, I would, my opinion on this is I would prefer to go forward and just get this out of the way. I don't think that we need to save this cash for Penfield because we have cash for Penfield already. And I think this is just cleaner. So that's my opinion. Any other board members have a view on this?
Mr. DeWitt's hand's up. Mr. DeWitt's hand was up. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, sorry. Mr. DeWitt, you have a light background and your hand is sort of blending in with your face in their wall.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Curley, for giving me the point. So I thought I understood that we had to take these funds and move them into something that's already been bonded, and there's no open bonding for Penfield. So I guess, Mr. Walsh, are you saying we would wait and see if we are going to bond something for Penfield potentially, and then if we don't bond it, then we would just roll it into this? Is that your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question was, can we wait 60 days? I mean, because the air conditioning project has already been approved, and it's all in the waterfall, nice and neat, exactly when they plan on bonding it and things like that. So I didn't see any reason why we couldn't postpone this, for 60 days.
Madam Chair, can I dovetail off that? Is there a reason, John Safstrom, to not bond it? So to take Mr. Walsh's question on waiting 60 days, is to put the bond in any jeopardy?
Well, you've already got the proceeds. My advice when you've got proceeds is always to spend the proceeds as quickly as you can. So you've got an authorized project. My understanding is when the board gets to discuss Penfield, you're going to discuss how to fund that. You might decide to fund that from bonds. You might decide to fund that from other sources. So generally, we tell our clients once they have got bond proceeds on hand to spend them as quickly as they can. I don't know, Mr. Walsh, which of these things will come online first, whether Penfield will come online first or the schools. What I do know is there is no outstanding bond authorization spend for Penfield right now. So you're not going to spend the money for Penfield, whereas Caitlin and Jared would have to check. The board may be able to spend this money right away.
And I understand that, John, but, 60 days waiting and not making a decision. We've had this money longer than 60 days, right? We've had this money for some of it for since 2003 that we've been paying interest on.
The Metro project.
Interest every single year since 2003. So, so when I look at that, I think it's a little disingenuous to say that 60 days is now also going to become a problem.
All right, why don't we move forward on this? I mean, we've got we've got 45 minutes in on this. I mean, if we want to make a motion to do something else with it, I would
I'm
do
gonna
it.
make a
I would
motion.
just say,
I'm going to make a
okay,
motion that we postpone the discussion on this for 60 days to our next scheduled meeting in 2 months from now, whatever date that is, Madam Chairwoman. And we can pick it up at that point, since I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, we are making interest on the money that's in our account. It's now at 4.5% we're making money on. So and I'm sure the interest that we're actually paying is a lot less than that. So it's almost like arbitrage in a way. I mean, we're making money on our money. You know, we're making a higher interest than we're paying out, so everything's good.
Mr. Walsh.
What?
yeah, I think the money's gonna earn interest until it's spent on either thing, either way. So I'm not sure it matters, but do we have a second for this motion?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other discussion with the board?
Yeah, I have some questions.
Stark?
So remind me, anyone, we bonded nothing for Penfield yet, right? But what have we've allocated? What was the nature of what we did?
We put away money under 2 different years. I think one of them started off at like $9-point-something million for remediation work. And I think some money's been spent. I'm sure the finance department could tell us what that is. And then there was some amount we put back last year, which I think was, I think we have approximately $15 million, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Jared?
and we'll have this conversation later on where we'll update you on the, what's been put aside for surplus for the purpose of Penfield, whether it's remediation or construction, but there has been, Mr. Walsh is right, it's about $15 million remaining between those 2 accounts over 2 different years. So the second one, the second tranche of money, the 8.4 million that was done in October, was just we kind of held that in abeyance, and we still need to make a decision about where that money is going to go. So it hasn't been committed specifically for either for Penfield or for remediation yet. That determination still needs to be made.
Okay, and then like for this money to actually exist, we have to pass a bond authorization, right? Or allocate it out of capital projects, or does this money already exist?
That money exists. Those are surplus dollars, right? But there needs to be an authorization to spend it in a certain way.
This is an apolitical issue because I think there's going to be a difference of opinion that cuts every different way across this room about whether we think Penfield should be rebuilt or not, right? And if there happens to be $1.6 million worth of money sitting there that could reduce the headline cost, politically it's not a bad idea to apply it there. So I'm kind of with Mr. Walsh on this one. But I have one question for the attorney. I recently learned about a concept called yield burning, which I didn't know about. And that is when, as Mr. Walsh alluded to, a municipality issues bonds at, say, 2.5% and can put that money in treasuries at currently 4.5%. So here's a hypothetical. If we issued $1 million bond today, and what's like the minimum amount of that we would need to spend, and in what period, in order not to raise the ire of the IRS or the MSRB or whoever else is watching us do these things?
The IRS usually wants you to spend your bond proceeds, if you can, within 2 years.
And we clearly have had instances where we haven't spent at all. Is there a threshold where?
I mean, in this case, honestly, what we did is a cleanup on various accounts. I mean, most of these accounts were we bonded significant amounts of money, and I would suggest these are residual amounts. The IRS would obviously look at the fact that all of these cases where there was leftover money, it wasn't just sitting there, it was sitting there because the finance department knew there were federal or state grants that were being audited.
Okay, just take my hypothetical. If we issued $1 million today, is there a threshold if we fall below which the IRS or MSRB start to get concerned about what we've done?
You know, if you get audited and you were not showing, if you were not showing the wherewithal to spend that money and to spend that in an expeditious fashion, and hopefully within 2 years, sometimes 3 years, you know, you could subject yourself to an issue. The real thing is the IRS doesn't want it's the whole arbitrage concept. The IRS doesn't want you to issue bonds at 2.5% and then invest it and get 4%, in effect use it for a way to fund the working capital of the town. Fairfield does not ever do that. And so any of these residual amounts that were left over that maybe we would have liked to have spent earlier are really the results of reasoned analysis on waiting for an audit or some other grant or something else to come in.
And we're aware of that potential, and a lot of other municipalities are aware of that arbitrage earnings, and we have reached out to a company that does analysis of any bond proceeds that we have, and looking at whether or not there was interest made on it, and whether or not there could be arbitrage earnings that we'd have to address in the future. We're also looking at our current, the cash that we have on hand now, which is, you know, if typically we would want to make the highest interest that we could off of it, but you know, now we're looking at the amount of free cash that we have and making sure that it's invested at a rate that may be lower, so that we don't run into arbitrage issues.
And I'll also add, this really hasn't been practically speaking, this hasn't been a problem for the last many number of years, because your bonds have been issued at such low rates of interest, and obviously the return on whatever you had on hand has been, even in many cases, even lower than that, given the rates on treasuries and other things in the market. Obviously, the world is changing now, and we are advising all of our clients that they need to be aware of the whole arbitrage play between what they issue their bonds for and what they might invest it in, because the IRS will be looking at that again. The IRS hasn't really looked at that for the last few years because they hasn't existed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just getting back to the motion that's on the table. My feeling is that this exercise is a administrative cleanup exercise, and that we've got excess proceeds that need to be cleaned up, put somewhere. We have a project in hand that we know has been approved. We know that the air conditioning project is moving forward. They will be able to. They are spending the money, and that until they do, these proceeds are already on hand collecting interest income for the account. So I personally don't think this is appropriate to redirect towards another project. I trust Caitlin and Jared's judgment to put this towards the air conditioning project. And I think if we try to steer this towards Penfield, which is a very big unknown at this point, I think it just delays the housekeeping aspect of what this exercise is meant to be. So I'm going to vote no on the amendment, and I'm going to support the original request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Yeah, I'll just add, I think, listen, I think we're talking about two pots of money, but there's cash in the Penfield account. There's cash from these leftover authorizations. It's fungible. I'm not sure what we're accomplishing by delaying. So I would, I'm not going to support the the amendment. Any more input before we vote on this item? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the motion by Mr. Walsh to delay this item until a date certain, which I believe, Mr. Walsh, you intended that to be our April meeting, which would be April 4th.
I said
All
60
in favor
days.
of that
So
motion?
today's March 2nd, so I said 60 days. So it'll be the meeting in May.
Okay, so our May meeting, which would be May, let's see, when is that? May 4th. May 4th. So all in favor to postponing this item to May 4th, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Mr. Testani, Mr. Walsh, Ms. Leclerc. Am I missing anyone? Okay, opposed? Ms. Charlton, Mr. Matola, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Stark, is that you? Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Curley. Okay. All right, so that motion fails. If we could move forward to, unless there's any other comments, can we move forward to vote on the main motion? So all in favor of adopting the bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Approving the Reallocation of Surplus Proceeds for Projects Previously Approved for Bonding Authority as set forth in the meeting materials," please say aye. Or I'm sorry, raise your hand. So let's see, am I missing anybody? It looks to be unanimous.
It is
Did anybody not
unanimous.
raise? Sorry?
I'm just telling you it's unanimous. Everyone's hands up.
It's unanimous. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it. Okay. So let's move on to item 4, which is to discuss WPCA finances and operations. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Marmion. Okay. So before we get into this item, I just want to offer some context and background, even if for the benefit of the public. The board will remember, I hope, most of this, but back in November, the East Trunk Wetlands Crossing Project came before us for approval. That is a $6.2 million proposal, and at the time, it was presented as a project that would take advantage of a $750,000 state grant, require $3.5 million in bonding, and use $2 million of the WPCA's fund balance for financing. This board had a number of questions about the total cost of the project, which had roughly tripled since we first heard about it in May 22. And there was also concern about the use of fund balance and how the allocation between fund balance and bonding was determined. And also how the use of that fund balance would impact the WPCA's financial condition in light of other large projects on the horizon. There was also concern at that time that the full board had not seen the overall capital plan and waterfall for the town, and there was a desire to see that to understand how the East Trunk project and future WPCA projects would impact the town's finances, bonding, and capacity for other capital projects. So as a result of that, you'll recall the board unanimously voted to postpone consideration of this project until we had the waterfall and a financial plan for the WPCA. We did see at our January 31st capital planning workshop a waterfall with a capital plan for the WPCA, which had roughly $150 million of capital projects over the short and medium term. We had discussions about the implication of that magnitude of capital investment on the town overall, including questions about whether the WPCA could possibly sustain that level of debt service on their own without assistance from the town. And we walked away from that meeting agreeing we needed more discussion on these issues, and the sooner the better. So that brings us to tonight. You'll see on the agenda, the East Trunk Wetlands Crossing Project is back before us later in the agenda. And we still don't have a comprehensive financial plan to discuss for the WPCA. And to be fair, Mr. Schmidt warned us back in November that it would take many months to pull something comprehensive and meaningful together. But we do have some information prepared by the WPCA commissioners to look at, including a 10-year financial projection, which I hope will be helpful to the board in gaining more clarity around the WPCA's operations and finances. And we have Mr. Joe Devanzo, one of the WPCA commissioners, here to help walk us through it, along with our CFO. And he has also been kind enough to respond to some questions that the board had from our November meeting. So I want to thank him for joining us. The materials that were provided begin on page 4 of the posted backup. And I will turn this over to Mr. Devanzo and Mr. Schmidt to walk us through this in whatever manner they choose to do.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. What you have in front of you is, again, as been told, it's not a financial plan, it's more a directional plan. It indicates all the revenues we intend to collect over the next 10 years. It shows the non-capital items that we would be spending on, and it shows the bond servicing items that we would need to cover for a plan of, as Ms. Charlton said, $147 million over the 10 years. So really, basically, the revenue comes from our user fees. And on the plan you're looking at, conservatively, over the after this year, we increased the fees by 3%, a very conservative number. The other big numbers in revenue would be, and I'm finding out tonight, the other big number we have is $15 million in our reserve fund. We have $15.5 million right now, would probably generate more like $400,000 or $500,000 at 4.5% than what we've been seeing. So this one is very conservative on that part. I&I fees, we anticipate we would raise about 5% a year. That would be what the developers who are developing apartment buildings and multi-family housing would be paying us. And you could see that up in the top section where it says revenue, we would be generating up to from $8.6 million this year, which is our budget, all the way up to $11 million with those conservative estimates. So that would be our source of income. In addition, that yellow section is just our what-if games we play. There are potentials to bring in grants, potentials for town contribution that will obviously these things have to be decided. And then we have talked at our commission with the potentials for capital surcharges for our residents, for our ratepayers, not residents. So what I would like to do is just turn it over for questions, but the one thing I will point out is based on our conservative revenue and what we're planning on spending over the next 10 years, we do run into the box on the bottom of the chart, which shows that we basically run out of money by 2030 at the pace we're going without making any changes. And coincidentally, in 2029, we start with the plant, which is in this scenario at $98 million capital.
I'm sorry, are we on page 10 of the backup? I'm trying to understand where we're tracking to.
Yes. Yes. I was referring to the backup. I think it was page
Yeah, it's on page 10 of the PDF.
10.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it says 10-year financial plan.
Yep, got it. 10-year projection? Yep.
Yep. So I'll turn it over to the board for questions, but maybe just if I could start out, Mr. Devanzo, thank you for the work that you've done on this. Can you just help everyone understand what the process is? I understand that this is primarily the work of the commission at this point. I know you've discussed it with Mr. Schmidt and others, but what is the process the commission is going through to look at this plan, to make these decisions, to decide on things like the appropriate level of fund balance to maintain. I mean, can you just talk to us a little bit about how you're doing that work and how you interact with the town and in terms of, our finance department and the WPCA management?
Okay, from the engineering side of both the town and we have an engineer on staff at the plant. They make the recommendations of the timing, basically, of the projects. Timing is based on the life of the asset. Timing is based on, for example, you talked about the East Trunk Line, the development on that side of town where we need capacity, where we may need capacity, things like that. So and dealing with the plant manager, we deal and create both non-capital and capital projects based on the town's guidelines. And we prioritize them and put them on a list, and we look at the funds we bring in. We run it just like a business, basically. We bring in what we're going to bring in funds, what we expect to bring in funds, and what we expect to expend in funds, and put the two together, and then we play some what-if games with how we're going to forecast what we're going to do. And that's basically the sheet you've got in front of you. It's not a financial forecast. It's a planning forecast, if I could call it that.
Okay, and let me just maybe to clarify a little bit, and I see Mr. Curley's got his hand up as well, but in terms of decisions around rate changes, surcharges, whatever that might be, what is your timing for making those decisions on an annual basis, and how does that coincide with the budget process in
Right.
terms of when it happens and how it flows through?
Okay, so in the budget process, which you're going through right now, and basically it gets finalized in the springtime, we have a revenue forecast that we develop with the town budgeting staff, Jared's staff, and we agree on a bottom line number, which is also tied into our expense number. So what we balance the expenses of the WPCA with revenue to cover it. In the July-August timeframe, this is our benefit. In the July-August timeframe, we then can take the numbers, the user fees, the permits for sewers, the I&I fees, and as a commission, we go through the rates and determine based on usage, based on what we see with the building department as to what they're seeing as permits that are going to be pulled. We establish rates. We have a special meeting usually in July, August, and we will establish the rates for the ratepayers, the FOG permits for the restaurants. We will review and establish the rates for I&I and the sewer rates. So that happens in the July-August timeframe. So,
And those rates are effective when?
The permits, the I&I, the sewer permit, and the FOG permits can go into effect right after we announce our special meeting. We put it in the paper. They go in effect the following week. The ratepayers, we develop the invoices, go out through the tax department, through the tax collector in September, and they're due October 1.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll turn it over to others. The reason I'm asking is, the budget for the WPCA as a self-sustaining fund, the revenue has always just been a plug to equal the expenses, so the revenue does not take into account, at least the budgeted revenue doesn't take into account these rate increases, which are decided after the budget process and do impact the same fiscal year of the budget that was recently passed, if I'm stating that correctly.
That is correct. We do use the revenue side of the budget that you're seeing, that you would see in your package. We use that as our guideline. And this year, the budget function of the town decided to add what you call it's the flow-through. We always set our rates higher than covering the expenses. We used to use a target somewhere between around $1 million. We tried to recover $1 million more, which would fall into our fund. That's how we've built the fund over the years to $15 million, and in anticipation of the capital that was coming in the future. So we have it now plugged. So you see a 26% increase in our budget in this package for this year, but $735,000 is simply what is the excess that would normally have fallen through to our fund. It's being accounted for to balance revenues and expenses. Just a little accounting change that was done by the town just to account for it.
Right, and this is similar to what we were doing with the general fund, where we would appropriate money to go into fund balance, and so this is a similar type of.
We would call, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Curley?
Yeah, real quick, thank you. And thanks for that question, Madam Chair, because it was in line with what I was going to ask. Just wanted to clarify that and confirm that the 10-year projection that you put forward here, it really is a projection, right? Because you do have to set those rates on an annual basis. And after we get past the current year, all of this is speculation, right?
We set the rates. When you say we set the rates to cover the expenses of the plant and to build the fund. Yes.
This is my point.
Right.
So that
we don't
beyond a
necessarily
year, we're not gonna everything. Okay. So just one question, and it relates just back to the last time you were here, Mr. DeFonso. I think if my recollection is correct, you had indicated that the fund would be your fund would be depleted by 2027. And now you're projecting that it would be depleted by 2030. So that's certainly good news. But I guess it just begs the question, and I understand this is a forecast, but is it because you expect to raise rates? Is it because you delayed projects? Or what is it that allowed you to get out a few more years?
Both are correct. We expect to raise rates, and we've also moved some projects around because we saw that we had a deficit over the next 5 years. So we went back and looked at some of the projects and moved them around a little bit.
Okay, and I know that one of the other topics that came up in the last meeting where you were with us talked about how we have a lot of critical infrastructure that is at or beyond its useful life, and that a lot of these projects just have to get done. I imagine that when you've reprioritized those projects or delayed them, you didn't jeopardize or push them out too far.
Leading question, yes, we did not jeopardize. We did it logically.
All right, I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curley. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Devanzo. So, excuse me for looking away. I'm kind of curious. The line called estimated departmental expenses, is that, so I just want to be 100% super clear. This is everything, right? This is the anticipation of the trunk line. This is everything that you think you need to do from the period of this year out to 2034, and hopefully some amount of contingency just in case you forgot something. Is that accurate?
Okay. Well, Mr. DeWitt, you referenced the estimated department expenses. That would be just the line for the department, running the department on an annual basis. The line below it would be the spend for the projects that are non-capitalized, and the line below that would be the bond servicing for the capital we needed, for the bonding we needed, the servicing for the bonding we need. So the three lines have to be taken, and those are all expenditures to us, three different expenditures.
The department expenses is just to keep everything running, nothing like nothing above and beyond like a trunk line or anything like that. Okay, so that's.
Absolutely. Now, just let me, Mr. DeWitt, just, the department running also includes a line item that has equipment and things like that, but it's running the department, what the plant manager says he needs to keep that plant operational. That's in the departmental expenses. Did I confuse them?
Okay, got it. And then non-capital spend, and then bonding services.
Right.
Is there,
Non-capital expense, you have a tab behind this page on the backup. Hopefully you're looking at, that has the non-capital, the projects that are under $100,000.
Okay. I don't see it, but I
Can
mean,
you just
I'll go
point that
forward.
out for everybody, Mr. Gafon?
Is there any assumption in here that the town is financing any of this?
There's an assumption that the town is not financing it. If you look at the yellow portion, you can put numbers in there, and it would readjust this spreadsheet. So that is a blank line. I took all the assumptions out, all the assumptions of whether we're going to get grants, whether we're going to put a surcharge on the bills, whether we're going to have town financing. It's all out of this. This would say, at this point, what we know, we don't need any more grants, we don't need any town financing, and we have enough money to carry us through to 2030. We go a little negative in 2030. 2029, it would carry us through.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the very bottom, in the dark box at the bottom, that 12,500, that's 12.5 million that's currently in your fund, and you're just burning that down until you get to 2030, correct?
Okay, and I put 2 million, if you look at in the squared off box with the thing around it, 12,500,000 less 2 million reserve. So I took 2 million aside for a rainy day fund. So that's
Your contingency.
That's contingency.
Fund balance, yeah.
Right, that's
Fund balance,
contingency, exactly.
right. Okay, no, that's helpful. I'm glad you yellowed that yellow box is empty for right now, because it does kind of paint the picture that we could potentially, anyway, spend the next year or two figuring this out and see how the rates are favorable, and hopefully we get more favorable numbers, and then in 2026 or whatever year, then the town could start putting in if it's needed. So this is a lot of great data compared to last time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. One more thing I've left out. You have bond counsel on the phone, on the call. I used 20 years at 3.5% for the bonding. That's another assumption that's in these numbers for bond servicing that you need to know. If it goes up, then our expenses are going to go up. But 3.5 is what I've used for every capital project that's identified in here.
I think that's consistent with our overall, Jared, am I right? Is that consistent with what we've got in the waterfall right now?
Yeah.
The waterfall varies from year to year, but that's, for a 10 or 20 year projection, yeah, that's going to be in the range.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt, and I appreciate your point. I think what we have here is those yellow boxes are effectively the opportunities that we have to address the deficit, and those are part of the planning process that Mr. Schmidt had referred to in our earlier discussions that the town is going to be looking at over the next months. So thank you for that. Other questions? John, help me out here. I can't see the screen.
Mr. Stark has a question.
What would make this even more useful would be if I could see the capital spend by year across the bottom and the bond issuances. So is there a piece of backup either from this meeting or a prior meeting where I could just write that in?
Sorry, the spreadsheet has 3 tabs in it. Obviously, it didn't come across in your backup. It has the had asked for, which is that funny-looking thing that shows the cash flow.
Yeah, we can follow up with
It's in
that.
tab 2 and tab 3. I'll get that to you.
Oh, okay. So that didn't get PDF'd and put into the posted backup? Is that what I was looking at the
Right.
electronic copy,
Right, that
so-
didn't get put into the backup, it looks like.
Okay. We will, we'll make sure that that gets added to the posted backup and also send it out to the board.
Madam Chair, Mr. Walsh, his hand's up.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Joe, because number one, before I start my comments, I'd just like to thank you for all your hard work. I know it's a tremendous amount of work, but it's also tremendously important because of, getting these large numbers and kind of basically seeing that the whole almost system has to be replaced. But I thank you for your expertise. I know you're a CPA. I know you have a lot of financial knowledge. So unfortunately, you're the right guy for the right job.
Thank you.
But I want to thank you for all the time, because I know this is
It is a
not-
team effort, though.
Yeah, I
It's
know
the entire
it's a team
commission.
effort, and you can thank the rest of the team on at least on my behalf. But this stuff that you've given us is great. I'd like to see some of the tabs that we didn't get. And one of my questions, just to lead into that. So first, thank you very much for all the time, because I'm sure you never anticipated a year ago that you'd be going through all this, but unfortunately, you're in this hell with us now. So let me ask, because you referred to one of the tabs. You said that earlier in 2029 that we will be spending, I thought the number I heard was $98 million towards the new facility? Or
The plant.
The plant.
Is,
We'll just call it the plant.
Is in the,
Yes, is in that.
Is in year
one of the
6.
exhibits, yeah. Okay. And you said $98 million. Is that just kind of like a large down payment? Because I thought the number we were hearing was going to be $120 million for the plant. And now these numbers are just going all over the place. So there was like 65 million, and then we were kind of shocked to hear it went to 120 million. Is the number either less, or is that just like a down payment and there's more money in the tabs after that?
the original plant plan was done in 2014, and it was $48 million. It grew to, over the years, through inflation, through other things, to $98 million. The $120 million was another estimate, and it was a financial estimate done because of the inflation factor 6 years out. They took the $98 million and inflated it 6 years out.
To make it then 120.
To make it the 120.
Gotcha.
So that gives you
Understood.
some idea of how it's developing.
Yes.
What we also have is in the plan, tab 2, Kevin, a update to the study. The plant was never designed, the study in 2014 was never designed to increase the capacity of the plant. It was basically to replace the components of the plant. So we have to get that updated and get the engineers back in there to look at each piece. I mean, we're fixing the digester right now. We might be able to extend the life of that digester, which was part of the plant plan, which means we don't have to do it over this next period of time. Those are the things
Understood.
that are going on in the background.
Yep.
So, but that's how the number worked. It went from 48, it was at 98 a couple of years ago, and then it went to 120 with inflation.
Okay, so when you put $98 million in this current plan, why wouldn't you put in the 120 million, even though it might need to be increased because of the higher capacity you need to design for?
Just point in time. I will go back and I will put 120 in.
Okay.
Because then when you see the cash flows go out,
Yeah.
it's 15% right up front. You know, as the years go,
Yes.
it has another formula that
Yes.
works on the cash flows
Yeah.
going out. Yeah, I will go back 120.
Well, I mean, if you're doing getting a whole new estimate based on what you
Yeah,
the
that-
design now needs to be, we might as well just kind of wait. However, it becomes apparent that the town is going to definitely have to contribute to this, and you have a model that's able to do that if we told you what the amount would be.
Yeah, we have, this model could be adjusted to handle that.
Okay. So I guess it'll be up to probably this board to determine what we do there, and what a bond would have to go to everybody, all the departments, on all the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM.
And just so everybody here knows, we, as a commission, are in the process of hiring a consultant who's worked with other towns in Connecticut on just how to look at the costing and how to look at how you apply rates. Right now, we have the same rate for residential, commercial. We have talked about splitting the rates, going differently. We have some organizations in town that don't pay any taxes. We want to look and see, and they use a lot of our capacity. We want to look and see if we can do something in that effect. So we are looking at other ways to change what we're doing as far as how we collect and how we put out our bills, basically.
And that's exactly why I was saying that it would take months to do a plan that's going to balance over the long term. If you want one that's going to, you're going to continue to see the reserve in the fund balance of whatever it may be, whatever the WPCA decides, whether it's $2 million, $3 million, is that, the surcharge or additional rates that the WPCA decides to put into place is going to obviously, would be in that yellow area. And so that's going to affect other things that are happening, whether it's a town contribution. It won't affect the grants because those are kind of independent, but grants are another area that we have to research more and figure out the possibility and the probability of getting grants. And so, those things take time.
That's all I have, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. And Mr. Walsh, I just want to really thank you for that question. I think one of the things I had hoped we might get to for this plan tonight was to do exactly what you suggested, which was just to model out theoretically, based on the numbers we have today, and understanding and appreciating everything Mr. Schmidt said. But based on the costs we have today, what would this plan actually, what would the town actually have to contribute in order for the WPCA to maintain a targeted level of fund balance? Say it was $2 million a year. And I think what I got convinced of was, we could certainly do that, but I think, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but, as Mr. Devanzo and others have explained, this 98 million or 120 million plant project is based on a fairly old study. And I think there's a belief that there are different ways to accomplish that project and to get it done. And it might be able to be stretched over time or be done in a very different manner that looks very different from this current projection. So I think, that's what part of what Jared's alluding to in terms of the time it's going to take and the consultant to work some of that out. But what you asked for, I think, is the key for this board, and we'll keep updated over time to look at this and say, okay, we know we're going to be facing these things in the future. And as we start to solidify these things, what exactly does that mean to the town's, requirement to perhaps have to step up in some fashion? Because that, of course, will impact what else the town is able to do. So we will get there over time, but I would also join you in thanking Mr. Devanzo for, helping us get through this first step, because I think, we haven't spent this board hasn't spent a lot of time on WPCA issues over the years. And I think between the digester and then that capital plan that we saw, it's just kind of hit everyone over the head. And so, there's a need for us all to get a little more educated on what this is going to look like. And so hopefully this is a good first step for everyone. Other questions from board members? Ms. Marmion.
I just have a question, and in terms of thinking of the opportunities, the universities in town, Sacred Heart and Fairfield University, just clarify for me, they don't pay user fees, or how do they, and why are they exempt? Is it because we can't figure out the user fees for the students, or?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, they pay ratepayer fees for their use of the water and sewer system. They don't pay, they're not taxpayers in town. That's all I was trying to allude to.
So is there an opportunity there? I mean, can we look at this a little differently? Is that something you're looking at?
That was what I was trying to allude to. There
Okay.
may be an opportunity. Once we split commercial and residential, then the question is, do we then go further and look at high-use residential? I mean, we have the Turnpike. They don't pay. They use our sewer system. The commercial on the Turnpike at the exit 22. They're using our sewer system. Yeah. And they pay.
Well,
They
why-
pay, but they have air toilets. They don't use a lot of water. And that's how our system works on water use.
Okay.
That's what I was saying with last time. Volume is down because we're getting more efficient toilets. We're getting waterless toilets. So we need to start getting ahead of that and figuring out different ways to do our billing.
Understood. So, like an access fee almost.
Is this, I'm sure you will, but other towns or other university towns, they've looked at this and figured this out, and so you're going to look at how they maximize, payment from these high-use
That was, yes.
institutions?
Yes, that was why we wanted to bring in an outside consulting firm with expertise. We're going to spend $15,000 on trying to put together both the cost side of it, what could we do on our side, and how are other people billing. So we might want to switch our billing around a little bit.
All right.
We're recognizing that as it could be a potential for more income.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Other questions? I don't see any.
No questions from people here, it looks like.
Okay. Wow, Mr. Devanzo. That was easy. Hopefully easier
Thank you.
than we thought. All right, well, I want to thank you again, and at the risk of repeating what everyone said, this is, what's happening at the WPCA is incredibly important and consequential financially and otherwise to the whole town. So thank you again for everything that you do. We appreciate all the work. I did email to the board the spreadsheet. You should have it. If anyone's got their laptop with them, that has the 3 tabs. So you can look at that, and I will get that posted as well. All right, so if there are no other questions, we can move on to item 5. All right.
Madam Chairwoman, is Mr. Devanzo here for 5 and 6, or no?
I hope so.
Okay. I didn't know whether we were dismissing him or not. I was unclear with the language. You thanked him so nicely. I thought, and I see him packing up his stuff. I was getting nervous he was leaving.
No,
Okay.
no,
Oh,
he's
he's
here.
making
Well,
room.
I
thought you were-
assume
I thought
Mr.
you were
Hurley
packing
is
up.
going to be the point person on item 5 and 6, but if Mr. Devanzo doesn't have to speak again, I wanted to make sure we thanked him again for his work on the plan.
Because we may
Okay,
not
so
thank him about the next item.
All right, so Bill Hurley's going to be the star of item 5. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Appropriating $6,250,000 for the costs associated with the inspection and construction phase of the East Trunk Wetlands Crossing Project, authorizing a grant to reimburse $750,000 of such appropriation, and authorizing the issuance of bonds in an amount not to exceed $5.5 million to fund the balance of such appropriation." Okay, can I have a motion to put this item before us? Ms. Marmion, seconded by Mr. Matola. Okay, so the full text of the resolution was provided in advance of the meeting. It's included in the posted backup beginning on page 19. The backup for this item begins on page 24 and runs through page 40. And it includes cost estimates and also the detail of the cost increase that we initially talked about in November. The 6.4 million is compared to the original proposal of 2.4 million from May 2022. So our engineering manager, Bill Hurley, is here to take us through this item. And of course, Mr. Devanzo is still available for questions, as is Attorney Staffstrom for anything on the resolution. Mr. Hurley, welcome. Thank you once again for being here. You want to kick us off?
Sure, thanks. Good evening, everyone. The East Trunk Sewer Metro Wetlands Crossing covers the sewer replacement from the Metro Center to Kenwood Avenue. It involves construction and inspection project costs estimated at $6.25 million. There is a $750,000 grant component from the DECD and a proposed town share of $5.5 million in bonding. The East Trunk Wetlands crossing will replace 311 linear feet of the existing 33-inch sanitary sewer pipe with a new 36-inch reinforced concrete pipe along the same alignment within an embankment across Ash Creek inland wetlands adjacent to the Metro Center, as proposed by the town's consultant, D&B Engineers. The project will reduce inflow and infiltration, reduce sewer system overflows, and increase capacity for future development. Design services for this project were awarded to the consultant in April 2021. Construction plans have been completed and the permits have been obtained to start construction once funding is secured and the contract is put out to bid. The purpose is, again, to replace a portion of the sewer main that carries about 2/3 of the town's sewer flows to the WPCF plant. The new 36-inch line will expand capacity for the Metro Center development and provide necessary improvements to the system. The request includes construction of the sewer, design services during construction, specialized inspections, environmental inspections, and general daily inspections. The reliability cost estimate is based on the latest information from the design consultant for construction and inspection costs and are based on the number of days for anticipated construction. The consultant had given us a range of 13 to 16 months, so we are using the 16-month as a worst-case scenario. The cost to complete the pipe replacement will depend obviously on the actual contract bids and final field conditions. There were some environmental considerations, as the town must hire a licensed environmental professional to perform the specialized inspections throughout the project per IBC codes and permits. Regarding financing, as it was alluded to before, the $750,000 grant was extended thanks to Mark Barnhart, through December 2024. And with the condition, though, that it's completed and closed out by then. The town share is anticipated to be $5.5 million with GEO bonds, and the debt service from that bonded amount will be paid by the WPCA operation budget, which I think was in the resolution. The service life of the project is expected to be in the 60 to 80-year range, and has been listed on the waterfall chart for some time. I can go a little bit into detail of why the costs had gone up. The preliminary construction cost provided by D&B in late November 2021 was for budgeting purposes as requested by the WPCA for the capital planning workshop. Only preliminary information was available at this time, and the cost was provided. The estimate was based on a design concept that included the replacement of the sewer pipe within the same alignment and the use of existing soldier piles as a support of excavation. The preliminary cost provided was $2.4 million. The cost of the items were detailed below, and I think that's in your backup. where they had reinforced concrete pipe, connection to manholes, the supportive excavation, dewatering, general excavation, excavation and disposal of contaminated soil, the clean soil, foundation testing, wetland restoration, and temporary bypass pumping. Following the completion of the detailed design and after all the boring and soil testing information was completed, the topography survey and additional details found on the Metro Center plans, all that was combined in for their final design. And some of the information that impacted that design and the construction cost were included, where the soil conditions resulted in deeper and more numerous piles than expected. Again, the original one assumed that we were going to use the existing piles. We now have to put in new piles. Dewatering quantities were calculated based on groundwater measures, and we have to use frac tanks for that. Longer construction duration, which impacts the dewatering and the bypass. Originally, the project was expected to be 8 months, and as I said before, it's going to be now 13 to 16 months. Wetland restoration and permitting per Army Corps of Engineers, Connecticut Deep, and the Fairfield Inland Wetlands. Construction access had, with the size of the equipment and the additional restoration, and then special care with the environmental liner, which has been confirmed by the DEP, by the previous plans, and even DPW had done recently some test pits to confirm those locations. The result was a construction cost estimate of $5.5 million. This increase is a result of the impact of unprecedented inflation on the materials and labor, and they do include a contingency and an escalation factor as well. One of the items that was not listed was the inspection and construction administration. So that's what brought the $5.5 million to the $6.25 million. And then they, in the backup material on page 4 in that group, it has the reasons why and some of the major costs of why it went up. And again, just to, in the interest of time, I'll just say it was cradle and support beams, site access, the supportive excavation and installation, dewatering, the wetland restoration, and the bypass pumping. And that support of excavation was, again, the piles increased by about $1.2 million for doing that, and the cradle on top that would support the sewer, the bypass and the new sewer, and the bypass pumping. As we mentioned before, there's a lot of flow going through this. The longer duration adds to the cost, and this is 24/7. This, obviously, the sewage flow continues to operate, and we have redundant pumping, meaning we at least have 2 pumps on site at all times. There were some other reasons. Let me see if I had them from a phone call with the consultant and some of my own notes. I think I've covered most of them. I just wanted to double check. Oh yeah, just in terms of the excavation even, we're dealing with 15 feet of excavation or more. And as I'd mentioned before, the previous construction cost estimate did not include the detailed inspections that are required. We just to let everybody know, as a side note, in order to reduce costs, we did look at other alternatives such as micro-tunneling, pipe bursting, and other various methods. And we also even looked at maybe doing a parallel pipeline, which, you know, would save a little bit on the dewatering and the bypass pumping. But the DEP and Fairfield Wetlands made it clear, and the staff made it clear they did not want to disrupt the tidal or inland wetlands. And there's also that presence of the liner that's there at the Metro site. So that kind of handcuffed us. That, based on the soil conditions, is why we're doing a temporary bypass and then replacing the pipe in the same area or the same location that's there. Hopefully I've answered most of your questions, but I'm here if you have any additional questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hurley. Questions from the board? Mr. Walsh?
No, I would just like to tell Ms. Early, I really appreciate you doing the reasons for the price increase, because some of the other reasons that we were presented before, like just inflation, that's just the way it went, seemed kind of like, at least for me, a hard answer to swallow based on the drastic increase of, like 200% or whatever. So this, I know, probably took you a lot of work to put all this together. So, but I really appreciate it because it definitely shows how the scope of the project had to change over time, and the environmental costs for testing and everything. So I will tell you that as one member, it makes me feel a lot better having seen this to understand why the cost increase went up so dramatically. So I know it was a lot of work, but I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank
Stark.
you. Are you all set, Mr. Walsh?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Mr. Stark?
Yeah, I second that. Not like I'm necessarily going to retain this information because this is pretty technical, but I'll give it a shot. The original estimate, the 2.4 million, did that, you did us the favor of like telling us all the different ways you can put pipe down. Was it based on one of those other methods that are easier, the original estimate?
Yes and no. We figured with 3 different methods, you'd be able to find some cost savings somewhere. The original one, the 2.4, we did not know at the time that the figure that was given as a, we'll call it placeholder, as a conceptual estimate, did not even include the inspection. And so that would have bumped up the number a little bit anyway. And then the 2 big things, as I mentioned before, is where we were going to use the existing piles. Now we can't. We're going to go with new piles. And then the duration of the project going from 8 months to 13 to 16 months obviously had an impact. Obviously, we have our fingers crossed, and it'd be nice if the final costs are lower than this, but we wanted to present what we have, what I consider is the best estimate that we have right now. And just to let everyone know that the consultant had used estimating software called Sage Estimating Software and the RS Means, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. They did include an escalation and a 10% contingency factor, so hopefully that will give us coverage.
On the first page here, could you just explain what you mean by 3 million keeping the existing line operational and building an adjacent sewer bypass? Is that what we are doing or what we were gonna do?
Yeah, those are from the phone conversation notes that I typed up rather quickly. But yeah, it's to keep the line operational. If we were allowed to do a separate pipe, we'd be able to do maybe 80% of that construction without interfering with the existing pipe. And then you just have to worry about the 2 connections, basically. But for here, keeping that pipe running, you have to have the bypass pipe. And so you have to, as I said before, with 2/3 of the town's flow going, you have to keep that going. So that was a big factor in the cost, the borings, and the duration. Those were the big factors.
Does the bypass pipe itself cost $3 million? Is that what you mean? I don't think so, right?
Well, no, that also includes dewatering and some other factors. Yeah, the dewatering pumps, yep. Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair. Hey, Bill, how are you? So just real quick, on the pipe itself, right, what you were just talking about, as far as it's more apply with what, right, was what you said? Did I understand that right?
Well, that was one of the reasons why we couldn't do a parallel pipe. That was one of the reasons. There's other reasons as well, but that was one of the reasons. If you were to look at an aerial photograph, you'll see that there's a very delicate weir that controls the wetlands above, and then below it is a tidal wetland, and so basically we were sandwiched in the middle with the location.
And just out of curiosity, was the difference significant in terms of the cost?
Cost from what? The existing?
Let's
or-
say
or-
if wetlands agreed with our original pipe estimate, I just wondered what the price difference would, not that I'm gonna go against wetlands, obviously, I just curious.
Well, again, it's not just wetlands, it's DEP, Army Corps of Engineers, and all
Gotcha.
that.
All right.
And the other thing to keep in mind
I
is that we only have an easement over this. This whole project is in a private property, you know, the Metro Center property.
Right.
And so we have a limited space with that. So we couldn't go to the north because of wetlands, and we couldn't go too far south, and then, you know, there's only so much room. And like I said before, if we all have, and don't quote me on it, I'm going to say we have a 15-foot easement, maybe it's a little bit wider, but we're also going down 15 feet.
Yeah.
And so all that plays into it. I just wanted to highlight that some of the constraints, not just being the soils, but there were several permits going, and the pipeliner and some other, I think there were 3 separate DEP permits as an example, just for this project.
Right. Well, having an easement is always better than not having one, right? In this
Absolutely,
situation.
yeah.
Let me ask you this, and forgive me, I know I sort of ask this often. And obviously, you already have a grant. Is that, number one, is that guaranteed? Let's start with that, the $750,000, right? If the project's completed by a certain day, did I understand that right?
Yes, we've gotten 4 extensions, so I think we better not push our luck now. But it's to the end of December of 2024.
Okay.
So, as I was saying before, assuming if this board and the RTM approve it, we put it, because it's ready to go out to bid. So we put it out to bid, just arbitrarily say April, open up the bids in May, or give them the notice to proceed. Perhaps they could start in late May or June. And then if we run the 13-month clock, we're in good shape. Even at the 16-month clock, we have a couple of months to spare, but not too much. So that's why it was relatively important to present this to the boards, you know, when we did.
And I think you've explained this to me, again, previously, so forgive me ahead of time, but in terms of applying for these grants and finding out what may be available, I'm sure, knowing you that, and your department, that you've looked into other grants that the town may or may not be eligible for, and out of whatever potential grants may be eligible, this was the only one we qualified for, B, the only one that we were awarded. Are there other avenues, other grants that have been investigated prior to this? And in your estimate, is there anything that we could still potentially be awarded in the future?
Well, for this particular section, that's the grant. We actually transferred it from another grant to apply for this, for the 750. Because this one was going to go before the other section, we'll call it Section B, or Phase 2, if you want, of the East Trunk. That one, we recently, you might recall, we got a $3 million grant for that. And that was based on that we had the design plans for this one, and it was for, you know, economic development and things like that. So between our grant writer, Mark Barnhart, myself, and you know, DPW and the WPCA, we all put together a successful grant, as I said, that we get $3 million for the next section. We're constantly looking for grants, and
Well,
if
that was
there's
part of my
one
question.
to
Okay,
pop up, we're always looking for them. I think we're up to like 30-something grants, so we're always looking, because obviously when you can get 80%, or 50%, 80%, sometimes even 100%, you know, we feel it's a well worth endeavor, so thank you.
No, and I'll just echo Mr. Walsh and Mr. Stark's comments. I mean, this was very, very comprehensive, what you put together to help us to understand this. I appreciate that work and the work on trying to figure out how else we might be able to pay for this. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Any other questions from the board? Okay. I don't see any. I see none. All right. Okay. Any comment from the public? I don't see anyone there. Don't see anyone requesting in the chat. Okay, so we can move this to a vote then. All those in favor of adopting the bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Appropriating $6,250,000 for the costs associated with the inspection and construction phase of the East Trunk Wetlands Crossing Project, authorizing a grant to reimburse $750,000 of such appropriation, and authorizing the issuance of bonds in an amount not to exceed $5.5 million to fund the balance of such appropriation." Please raise your hand. Okay, it appears to be unanimous. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and
Right.
thanks for Joe and everybody else who helped get this on the agenda. I know it's a special meeting, so thank you.
All right, high fives all around. Okay, let's finish this up with item 6. So item 6 is related to item 5, and it specifies that the debt service on the bond authorization we just approved will be paid by the WPCA pursuant to a memorandum of understanding between the town and the WPCA. Since the full motion is printed in the agenda, I'm not going to read it aloud unless any board members object. Okay, so can I have a motion to hear the item in agenda item number 6, Mr. Stark, seconded by Mr. Walsh? Okay, is there any discussion on this item? Mr. Stark?
Have we ever had these MOUs before?
Yes, we do when we issue bonds on behalf of the WPCA, we enter into an MOU with them saying that they will pay the debt service on the amount. Yep.
So this is just ordinary and customary?
Yes.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stark. Other questions from the board on this item? Okay, I see none. I see no comment from the public online. Okay, so we can move this item to a vote. All those in favor of adopting the supplemental resolution set forth in item 6 of the agenda, please raise your hand. Okay, it is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. All right, well, thanks again. Bill and Joe, I know everyone's glad to have that behind us and looking forward to moving on and getting it done. All right, with that, we'll move on to item 7, to hear and consider an update on environmental remediation costs and liabilities. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Mottola. Thank you. All right, let me just take a quick look at the backup here, just so I can point everyone in the right direction. I just want to note the page number that we're starting on.
I think it's 42.
Yeah, I think you are correct. Usually I write this down and I did not do so. So hang on one second here. Yes, so cover page starting on 41. So beginning on page 42, we have the detail of the dollars set aside thus far, spending, and some additional information. And we also asked for a summary of the parties to whom we've paid for through all these appropriations, as well as a summary of the status of the remediation work that has been done and what remains. Is that Mr. Bremer there?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Twice in
You're
one
a little
day.
You're a little fuzzy on my screen. It did look like you from afar. Do you want to kick us off on this item?
Sure. I guess the best way to look at this is Jared and I are here to talk about a remediation update. I think Jared can start with the financials. He will go through the history and bring us up to expenses paid to date. And I'm really here to talk about what remains to be done and answer any questions about what has been done from a technical standpoint. Eli Gazal has joined me, I think against his will in engineering. I have drafted him into this remediation area, and so he's going to help me with technical things as well.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
All right, so just tell us, please, if you, as you go through it, if you just wouldn't mind, since there's a number of different schedules, maybe just point us to either the page number or the title of the schedule that we should be looking at.
I'm going to start on page 43 of the PDF. So this is fill pile appropriations, expenditures, encumbrances, and available balance. So we were asked to provide what's happened financially on the project since the last time we presented, and the last time we presented was August 31st. The data at that time was based on expenditures through August 2nd. And so what you'll see here is we have all the different funding sources. There are 5 of them. And one of them has been totally exhausted. That was all. It was from the operating budget. There were surplus transfers, which we talked about. The initial round was $9,885,000. There was a round of town bonding for some specific projects that was related to the 40 sites. That was done a while back. There's some WPCF funding, and then $1 million in ARPA. So what the top box shows is the amount that had been spent at the time as of August 2nd, 2022, and then this goes through February 8th of 2023. And then the bottom box is just the difference, which shows that we've spent almost $500,000 in that time period between August and February. You'll see one of the things of note, I would say, is the big fund that often gets mentioned that we spoke about earlier, the $9,885,000. The remaining balance on that is about $6.4 million left in there. So we also talked about the other dollar amount of $8.4 million that was transferred in October, but it wasn't specifically put into a fund or an account for remediation or for fill pile related expenses. It's awaiting its fate and where that money is going to go. But if you were to use that funding, the $8.4 million, that would get added to the 6.4, and that's where the $15 million figure comes from. In addition to that, we still have pretty much the entire ARPA funding, $1 million of ARPA funding, which we are going to be spending so that we can, be sure that, not that it's going to be an issue, but be sure that that's the only source on here that really has a deadline on it, so, which is until December 2024, but that's one that we will start hitting.
I'm sorry, I'm not tracking. On this chart, you're saying about 15 million, and I don't see any number there. It looks to me like we have 7.6 million available. Is that, am I missing something here?
No, what I was saying is the point I was making is that the 8.4 million that got transferred in October was not put into a fund or an account for any kind of fill pile or remediation. The 8.4 is not in here. And so if you were to move that money for one of those purposes, that would get added to here. And so the amount between the two surplus transfers, the 9,885 plus the 8.4, would be $15 million. What's left of the 9,885?
Can I dovetail off that, Madam Chair? Jared, and you may have said this, where is that 8.4 million?
It's been transferred into, it's kind of in a holding account right now, and is, as we mentioned, when we did it, we weren't gonna move it or spend it until we went to the Board of Finance for approval.
But it's not on the spreadsheet or
It's
any
not
of these
in there.
other spreadsheets, correct? Or in the backup anywhere?
So it's not part of this presentation anywhere.
Gotcha, all right. You just know it's there, in other words.
We know it's there, yeah.
Okay, gotcha, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mottola?
Thank you. So this sheet, Jared, we have the surplus transfers of 9 million plus. And so some of that money has been spent, right? All right.
Yes.
So, and I'm just reminding, I guess I have to go look at the minutes of the meeting when we did all this. I had thought that we transferred that money, the surplus, and then before it was going to be spent, I thought that you were going to have to come back to, us, the Board of Selectmen, and I think the RTM, or maybe just the Board of Finance, and tell us, what you needed to spend that money on. So can you just clarify that?
Sure.
Is my recollection wrong about that?
I think it is. My recollection was that this money was specifically put aside and transferred in for remediation, testing, and those kinds of purposes, and that we would, rather than having to keep coming back to you, that we would do these reports so that you can see exactly how it's being spent.
All right, and so that's the money that I think it was last August, the 8 million and change, we haven't decided what to do with that money. The intent was we believe we're going to need it for Penfield, and if so, that's when you would come back to the town bodies.
Right, and at the time, we presented a schedule and a plan for using the remaining amount of the 9,885 and the 8.4, and at the time, with the estimates that we had, we're trying to show how we would spend that money. What portion of it would go to Penfield for construction, what portion would go to Penfield for remediation, and then the 40 sites. But no, to your point, that wasn't voted on, wasn't approved. It was just, that was our recommendation at the time.
Okay, so this money is being used basically for the associated cleanup of the fill pile issues, the variety of them that are throughout the town of Fairfield.
Cleanup, testing, yeah.
And and if we wanted to use any of this money for Penfield at all, even not related to fill pile issues, you would have to get permission from us, right?
Definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, I'll take a look at those minutes. Thank you.
And, just to look at this chart in another way, or to point something out, that middle box, that's where we are today. So you can see the total amount that has been spent to date from each of the sources and what's remaining.
Okay. All right.
I'm all set for now with questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rottola. I actually have the same question as you. So, Jared, I just, and I'll go back and look at it too. I guess I thought that we, and in fact, I'm trying to quickly look at this now. I think that when I look at the minutes of that meeting, and the reason I remember this is because when we did the transfer this past October, I remember that the form of the authorization was put together. I thought it was put together by Pullman Comley, and it's the same form of authorization that we used last year. So I guess my question is, I did not think that we authorized an appropriation. I thought we simply authorized a transfer, and that 9.8 million we would need to reauthorize that or authorize an appropriation in order to spend it. So I was actually surprised at that too. So I guess I've got two questions, and we can circle back on this, but I do think it's important. So the 9,885,000, that was from fiscal, so that would have been done in 2021, right? The fall of 2021. So that the surplus from fiscal 21, is that what that is meant to be?
Yes, yep, that's right.
Okay. So that's the fiscal 21 number. Okay. Yeah, part of the reason that I was surprised when I looked at this and is, you know, when we first started, when this first started happening and we started doing remediation around town, it was very obvious. You know, we had playgrounds closed, we had fencing up around parks, and everybody knew something was going on. And I haven't seen anything going on lately personally. You know, I asked a couple of other people too. I'm wondering where we're doing work at this point. I mean, we've spent $500,000 over the last months, you know, between, you know, the fall and the early months of this year. What active projects are we actually working on right now, and where is this money being spent? I see the cumulative dollars, but what have we been working on lately that we're spending this money on?
I think this is a cue for me to chime in. One of the sheets I sent was what we call the matrix, and I'm not sure which page it is on the handout I gave you. It's the green sheet. Yeah. This has become our Bible, as a matter of fact. And
you guys need color printers.
I don't have a color printer. I don't know where this came from, but anyway, this has become our Bible. This is a listing of all the sites that are around town that are not the Phil Pyle and not Penfield. These are in all the different neighborhoods, that kind of thing. This is our Bible in the sense of this is all the sites that we know of, that we've been apprised of, and what we've basically done on everything that's green is done. You say you know, you haven't seen us. Well, we are now done with all the schools. So all the soccer fields that we've all heard about and everything that was done. We are down to 7 sites. You'll see Penfield is listed here as well, but if we ignore that, we're really down to 7 sites, 8 sites, and we expect to be all done by July 1st. That's the goal for us now. Where are we? We have an LEP. You have in your packet that I sent all of their projections on what they think the costs will be. Because we had one company doing all this remediation for us, the actual, not the oversight, but the actual removing of it. And they've been doing it now for a couple of years. They came to us and asked to raise their fees and that sort of thing, so I decided to go out for another RFP for the last few sites. So that's what we're focused on. Where the RFP will be going out next week. The old company may or may not win it, but so be it. And the plan is to finish these sites, as I said, by July 1st. So that's what we've been doing. That's where we've been spending the money to try to get this all done. I would say that if we are able to finish by July 1st, we'll be at least 1 or maybe 2 years ahead of what we have to do by law and regulation. So we're well ahead of schedule, but as we all know, the longer this stuff hangs on, and the longer we do this, the more expensive it is, just because there's a way that this work keeps generating bills. So I'd like to get it done, and that's why I'm pushing very hard to get it done by July 1st. So by looking at this list, it'll give you a good idea of what we've done, where we've been. We could certainly add, you know, dates and stuff like that to this, but it's really our Bible, and this is what we follow for the 40 sites.
No, thank you. And I'm not doubting that work has been done. I just, as I said, it just, you know, when we first started this, it was, again, very obvious with playgrounds closed and fencing up and parks closed. And I just haven't personally seen anything. So, I knew that some of the larger stuff was on hold because of our discussions with regulatory agencies. So, yeah, it might be helpful when we get the next update if we have the dates, because it's just, helpful to see the progress. I'm glad to hear that we are ahead of schedule. So I just want to clarify that this $500,000 or this 494, 317 that's on the schedule is having been expended since our last update. All of that was spent on projects on this green sheet, if you will. So all of that money has been spent on these individual sites other than Penfield and the fill pile.
I'm not sure if it's all, none of it's been spent on Penfield. There was some additional testing that was recently done on the fill pile, so I'm assuming that perhaps some of that money was allotted to that, but I'm not sure if we've received a bill yet for that last bit of testing that we're doing on the fill pile. But and I'll get into that later, what we're doing on the fill pile. But aside from that small amount of testing that was recently done on the fill pile, it's safe to say that all the money's been spent on these 40 sites. That's correct.
Got it. Okay. All right. I'll move on to others for questions, but I would like to request that somebody get back to us. I did just try to glance at the minutes from 2021. I actually do not see a spending authorization in there. It looks like the same thing that we did this year, which was simply to transfer funds. So I do want to revisit that, because if there is an authorization required, we should make sure we're handling this the correct way, both now and in the future.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Stark, you had a question?
Can
Yes?
can I respond?
Sure.
So I guess first, I'm surprised to hear that coming up now, because we've been, since that authorization was made, we've been spending money from that account, and we've been reporting on it as we come to you for reviews. And like I said, at the time, it was very clear that the intention of this money was to be used for remediation, site testing, and the like.
Well, regardless of the surprise, I want to look at what that actually does. And I would say that I do not believe we've had reporting. I think this August date, is that referring to the joint meeting that the first selectwoman had with all the bodies?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't recall in that meeting, or maybe I'm wrong, but this level of detail, we haven't been getting a lot of reporting on this spending. To be fair, we haven't necessarily asked for it, and I think maybe the reason we haven't asked for it is it hasn't been clear, what's been going on. So if we haven't asked, we haven't asked. But nonetheless, I would like to make sure that we've handled this appropriately, because I was under the impression that we simply transferred the money. So let's go back and take a look at that. Mr. Stark, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, just an easy one, I think. If a site received fill but didn't need remediation, I guess it tells us that the fill wasn't uniformly contaminated, right? And some sites probably didn't receive contaminants. Is that the way to think about that?
All the sites that received Julian fill, we had to do something with. Now, and there's a site, if there is a site out there that had Julian fill, and we didn't find anything, we still have to file a bunch of reports to tell them that we didn't find anything. And some of the sites, you're absolutely correct, some of the sites don't require remediation, but we have to get approval of that determination before we cannot remediate the site, if that makes sense.
Okay. Mr. Matola?
So the 7 million and change that we have available, are you confident that that's going to cover the rest of the work that we need to do?
On the 40 sites?
The remaining sites that you have to do?
Of the 40 sites, I estimated between $2 and $3 million will finish those.
Okay,
And I think that's a very good estimate.
all right. And then, so we'll have the remaining plus 8 million and change that we put away in August to deal with what other issues we need to deal with,
Right.
correct?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Thank you. And I don't know if you saw Mr. DeWitt's hands up, Ms. Charlton.
Mr. DeWitt? Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Um, for what it's worth, and this may go back to the very first time we put money aside for remediation and all. It's always been my recollection that the money was to be put into a separate fund, and we did not have to be consulted about the actual disbursement of the funds. We did want to be updated on what was happening, which is, I guess, which is what's happening this evening. Now, I was not at the meeting that moved the last fairly large amount of money into the fund, but prior to that, it's my recollection that we did give carte blanche, for lack of a better term, authority to the administration to spend the money in for whatever remediation actions they thought was necessary.
Okay, yeah, no, listen, we may have I don't know what everybody's recollections are. I'm suggesting that we go back and actually look at the action that was taken. There is a specific resolution on this in the minutes, and I thought with a quick glance that what we did 2 years ago was exactly what we did last September or last October. So that's what I want to go back and revisit and see if there is some action that should be taken now or in the future. Are there other questions from board members? Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize, I'm probably gonna repeat some of the discussion, but it was kind of hard to hear the discussion in the room. But I think I got most of it. Mr. Bremer, I think you said that your estimate for the remaining liability associated with the 40 sites is roughly 2 to 3 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, so I heard that correctly. Jared, if I understand your schedule correctly, we have roughly 7.6 million available in this money, in the monies that have been set aside per your schedule on page 43 of the backup, correct?
Correct.
All right. But the $2.3 million that you mentioned, Mr. Bremer, that does not include Penfield. Is that the only remaining project beyond? Is it Penfield plus the 40 is the total, or are there other projects or areas that we have to worry about?
Yes, there are two other areas you have to worry about, to put it your way. The fill pile itself, that comprises a very large area, and that's the main area from which all this material was extracted.
Yeah.
So that's a big area. And we have the WPCA, which we have an outstanding NOV on, which we have not even, we haven't even begun the testing. We haven't even laid out our test plan yet with the regulatory agencies. And the reason for that is we have so many other things we're attending to. We're gonna try to at least tackle those first. And the theory as well is that we're still negotiating with EPA and DEEP on the fill pile. Once that plan on how we're going to remediate that site has been agreed to, there's a strong belief that the parameters that we use for that plan we will able to apply to the rest of the WPCA site. So we want to get that plan in place, then we're going to use that plan for the rest of the site rather than begin testing and then having to negotiate a whole new plan for the rest of the site. So that's the theory behind it.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I'm just trying to get my arms around what a potential total figure is might be, but it sounds like until some of that work is done, we don't even have an estimate, correct?
Not an estimate you can take to the bank, that's true.
Yeah, and I do believe that in our annual financials, there was a statement regarding the remaining liability for the fill pile and related sites. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of you, but if I'm not mistaken, that number has come down. Jared, how does that analysis compare with what you're presenting tonight? Because it seems like these numbers are not reconciled with the financial statements.
I think you're referring to the CAFR. I'm assuming you are. And there is a difference between this year's and the previous year. The best way I can describe it is I was asked to determine what I thought the liability was, in my opinion, for these various sites with Joe Senofani in his preparation of the annual report. The good news is, yes, it did go down. The bad news from my perspective is I hate it, and I've said this to Joe, you're picking a number, and I like to talk ranges with him. And I gave him ranges for all these different sites, and what he did was he just picked the center of each range and added it up, and that was the number. He did that 2 years ago, and he did it this past year. The reason the number went down is when we were negotiating on Penfield, one of the things that I was told previously was that the parking lot was going to be separate from the building, that the parking lot may have to be ripped up. There were some PCBs there, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into all the details, but we were treating that from the town's perspective. I was treating that as a separate liability because I knew that a lot of the issues that relate to the parking lot have really nothing to do with the building. At least that's what I thought at the time. Make a long story short, I changed LEPs and we went with a bit of a more aggressive negotiation stance, I'll put it that way. And in fact, what we were able to do is fold the parking lot into the building. And so the ability to remediate, which has already been approved by DEP and EPA, it's really only one site. And as a result, we're not going to have to rip up the parking lot. We only have to do some hotspot removal. And so the amount I was carrying just for the parking lot was between $2 and $3 million. And that basically went to about $100,000. So that really is the bulk of the difference between the two numbers. So that was a small victory for us in an otherwise very bleak story.
The other reason is that we did some work was done throughout the year, so which obviously reduced some of the liability.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Curley. Yeah, I think if anyone doesn't remember the discussion when we reviewed the CAFR, it looked, and I appreciate, well, first of all, Tom, glad to hear that our remediation liability or the estimate for it decreased by $3 million because of the Penfield parking lot. That is very good news. Yeah, we learned about that because when we went through the discussion for the CAFR, there were two reasons that the liability declined. One was obviously some payments were made during the fiscal year, as Jared alluded to, but the other was that there was a change in estimate to lower the liability. And I think what you're saying is that's the $3 million. I think that the change in estimate was $3.5 million in the financials, but if we're talking about centers of ranges versus other numbers, that's probably the difference. But in any event, just to follow up on Mr. Curley's question, and maybe I missed this, but if I've got this right, the remaining sites are 2 to 3 million. We mentioned the fill pile, we mentioned the WPCA, you didn't attach numbers to those. And then we've got, putting aside Penfield construction, we also have Penfield remediation. So with those four categories, what is the total remediation number or liability that we're looking at? I think it was stated in the financials as something like $14 or $15 million. Although Mr. Centifanti told us the actual engineering estimates he saw were roughly 9 million. I mean, can you just help us understand that, Tom? If you add up, what are those pieces amount to? So with the remaining sites, 2 to 3 million, what is our current estimate to remediate the fill pile? And then when you add in Penfield and WPCA, what does that get to you? What does that get to in total? Is that consistent with the 15 million that was in the financials?
Yes. Let me just, I can go through my ranges that I always like to quote. Penfield, I believe it's going to be $4 to $6 million. And why such a wide range? Because if the building stands, I think the remediation will be close to 5. If the building is gone, the remediation will drop down to about 4. Why the difference? If the building's there, we're going to need to do a lot more vacuuming. If the building's not there, the digging is a lot cheaper. So that's my range. Now, I also want to say, I know I've said it before, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it again. These are estimates. These are based on what we think is under the building. If there's an extra foot of stuff under the building, then we're going to have to up these numbers quite a bit. It won't be another 5% or 10%. It'll be substantially more. But these are our best guesses of everything that I've been able to see, all the documents I've been able to read. This is my best shot. Fill pile. My fill pile range is $6 to $8 million. There's a big but on that as well. And the $6 to $8 million is really if we're able to cap that fill pile. Cap, what does cap mean? It's not a cap like you think, like we put plastic over it. It's basically you put 3 or 4 feet on top of everything of clean soil, clean fill. And we're going to need to fence it off, all that kind of stuff. But it's really 6 to 8 million if we are able to do that. We are still negotiating. We are, and it's difficult because the regulators, some of their position is we need you to remove a lot of that. And so the number would be substantially higher. Why do we think this? My LEP says of all the sites that he's been on in the past, he's always capped it. And this has been his experience. So for them not to cap this, that would really be out of the ordinary, notwithstanding the fact that that's some of the positions that they've been taking. So we need to keep working on that. But this is assuming that we're going to be able to cap. The 40 sites I said earlier is 2 to 3. So my range is 12 to 17. And again, there are a bunch of assumptions in those numbers, but based on everything I believe right now, I'm in that range. I don't have...
12 to 17 without the WPCA.
That is correct. Now, WPCA, I don't really have a number. We have done 0 testing. What I do know is that when we did the wall basically around it, we were hitting PCBs in various spots, which is why we got the NOV. So it's impossible to, I would just be making stuff up on trying to figure out what that liability is. Once we do the testing, and once we have a sense of the testing, because I hate to say it, but I actually have some experience in this, I'll have a much better sense of what it's going to cost once I see the kinds of stuff that they find there. But one of the problems we have with the WPCA, not to belabor this, is it's a Nike site, and the materials that we're talking about are not really from Julian Fill. They're historical. And I know there's going to be some problems on that site. I just know it. So, but to what extent and how bad, I don't know. I will say that over the 40 sites we've had literally months of meetings over various sites that were supposed to be the worst site in the world and all that kind of stuff, and it proved not to be the case. And there were other sites that we thought would be no problem at all, and they proved to be much more expensive. So, again, it's 40 sites, and I would think that that's probably true. So I just don't have a sense of what the WPCA is going to be at this stage.
Okay. And totally appreciate that, but that summary is really helpful. I'm wondering if maybe we could, and if this is here already, forgive me, but it would be helpful, I think, at least for me, to have that on one page, because I guess I thought we were in a slightly different place, maybe in total. But if we're at 12 to 16 million without the WPCA, the money we have set aside currently um, may not even be adequate to cover remediation, much less Penfield construction, right? And I thought we were, honestly, I thought we were in a better position than that. So am I understanding that correctly? So if we have 12 to 17 million plus WPCA, we don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something. And that compares to in the current balance that we have set aside right now is, what is that? Including what we set aside last fall.
16 million.
So 16 million. So we have 16 million, 16 million and of money set aside and an estimate of 12 to 17 million plus whatever the WPCA is. So is that the right way to think about this, Tom?
I think it is, and I want to stress that the 4 to 6 million on the Penfield is the remediation only. We're not talking, yeah, we're not talking about construction.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yep.
So the way, and I realize money is fungible, we've put money aside, whatever, but, I guess the way to think about it is that if you were going to dedicate everything we have put aside to remediation, the Penfield construction would need to be bonded, or alternatively, if we use that money for Penfield, we would still have to put aside additional dollars beyond what we have now to cover future remediation costs.
I think that's fair. I mean, if we do Penfield, then we may have to bond for the fill pile, that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay. Or, we get lucky enough to cover that through surplus. That's helpful. It might just be, helpful when we get our next update on this to maybe frame the summary with that information. Because I know for me, I tend to lose track of, I think we kind of remember how much we've put away, but how much we've spent and how much is remaining and how those estimates, how what we've spent compares to what we thought it would be, as of the previous estimate is always shifting a little bit. So that would be helpful.
Happy to
Are
do it.
there other questions? Mr. Walsh, did you have a question?
Trying to ask a question for about 20 minutes, so if you don't mind, I'd like to go.
Just text me or speak out, please.
Okay, I'll speak. I speak out. I have no problem speaking out. So,
Okay.
first of all, I mean, just in what you just said, Madam Chairwoman, I don't think any of us ever thought that the money we put aside was going to cover all the remediation work that needed to be done. It was just kind of like a down payment. I mean, the numbers that we were hearing from the beginning were like $20 to $30 million. I mean, we've been damn lucky so far, to be quite honest with you, on where we've come in on this. And since I've been thanking people most of the night on their hard work, I am unbelievably impressed by the amount of remediation work that has taken place so far. So I think, Mr. Bremer and your team, 30 sites I count, actually 32 I count out of approximately 40 have been completely remediated in this town. It's unbelievable that many sites have been able to be taken care of, and I've been kind of impressed with how much it's cost, to be honest with you. So thank you for you and your team and whoever was involved in the town for getting that done. I mean, the fact that we're down to 7 locations is unbelievable, to be quite honest with you. With the way I've seen environmental cleanups take place with clients and other things in my career. it's actually blows me away. I'm shocked by this list, actually. So thank you and the administration for getting all of that done. And the fact that the remaining 7 can be taken care of by July is quite impressive as well. In regard to these other numbers, I mean, Penfield's going to have to be done one way or the other. So I guess we're going to have to be dealing with that this month. And it's about time we're going to deal with it one way or another.
Correct.
When would that work? How long would that work take to complete the remediation work?
Tell me what the work is, and I'll
I
tell
don't
you.
know. I
you
thought
know-
you knew what the
No, no,
scope
no.
of the work was.
Well, no, I know the scope of the remediation work, but the question is,
What direction we're going?
yeah, is the
Okay.
building up or is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
building
okay,
down? I mean,
okay.
if the, it's obviously it'll take longer, but if the building's there, but to fix it as the first select woman wants to fix it, it'll take approximately 12 months, perhaps a little slightly longer, maybe 14 months.
Okay. Okay. And how much does that cost? 4 million? Or is that on the $4 million side, or is that the
If
5
if
million side?
If the building's up, then it's 5 million.
Okay. 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 And then on the WPCA things you talked about, isn't a lot of the contamination that the town's been finding down there just not having to do with fill pile stuff? It's been just historical
Absolutely.
contamination.
Well, you have to remember that, as I've learned, in the 50s and 60s, people would dump everything, and everything, they didn't care what you dumped, and it was all legal. So
I remember
now-
being there with my father, and you just opened your trunk and you
There
threw
you
whatever
go.
you want. No one looked at anything.
So now, once you unearth it and once you discover it, there's a whole bunch of things that we have to do to remove it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something we're going to have to just deal with going forward at the WPCA.
Is that something where we're going to have to test the entire site, or only when we do some type of construction? So why dig it up if we don't have to?
That's what I say all the time. Don't put a shovel in the ground. But unfortunately, we got an NOV due to the fact that when we built the wall around it,
The berm?
the berm.
No, not the berm. Put the steel
hardening project.
Hardening project.
It was part of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
hardening
yeah, yeah,
project.
Yep.
So we discovered PCBs, et cetera. So now a portion of the site, I want to say approximately 40% of the site, they want us to test the whole site.
Okay.
So we're going to be going in parking lots and everything, just digging holes and testing to see what's under everything.
Okay, so when you say PCBs, these are, once again, historical PCBs.
Absolutely.
Not from the fill pile,
Correct.
correct? Okay. So that's going to be its own situation and only came up because of the hardening project, correct?
That is correct.
Meaning if the hardening project didn't have these problems while we were putting it into the ground, that would have never come up.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. No further questions, but I will make a comment that, I think we should be prepared that we're going to, unless we have some serious surpluses, which we just were told at our second quarter, so far it's looking like we'll have another $5 million, but it's only half the year. So it's, we'll see how the rest of the year goes. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe we'll have some more money to throw at it. But I was never under the impression that that would pay for anything, that we were always talking about a bond for remediation work to complete the remediation work throughout. And I will also say that Mr. DeWitt's recollection of spending on these sites is similar to mine. I did not think they were going to come back to us, let alone two other bodies, the Board of Selectmen or whatever. We had an emergency going on in this town. I mean, just the 40 sites. Well, I can't see that every single site you were going to have to come back to us for a funding authorization to deal with this emergency. As Ms. Charlton said at the beginning, yeah, we all saw a lot of work. We all knew money was being spent. We didn't need to see a funding authorization. We knew that it was being spent. I was seeing orange fencing all over this town and at many of the sites that we're talking about right now. So I'm just a little, I guess I'm just confused by all of a sudden now we need a funding authorization for every single one of these sites. And we're asking it after most of this spending and remediation work is being done. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Curley, I see your hand, but Mr. Walsh, since you're confused, as I said, I think we should look to see if we have a spending authorization. And if we don't, we should correct it. And I will remind the board that when this process first started, we were in fact authorizing blocks of money to projects. I recall back in the day, you know, Brian Carey coming before the board occasionally and saying, I've spent this amount of money, I need X amount for the next 6 months, and he would go through this list with us and we would authorize money. So, you know, I am not suggesting that the town needs to, you know, come to us every week and ask us for permission for what they're doing. I'm suggesting that I want to make sure that we have an appropriate authorization for the money that's being spent, because I don't think that the form of what we did 2 years ago is any different from the form of what we did last fall. So if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong. But if the money last fall needs to have a vote to spend it, I don't know why that's different from the money that we transferred 2 years ago. So I would like to check on that. But we have, in fact, approved money in blocks out of what was set aside in the past. We just haven't done it recently. So that's the basis for my question. And I hope you're wrong. I hope we don't need to bond for this stuff. I hope that we can get through it with surplus over the next couple years if we're lucky. If we have to bond it, we bond it. But I am appreciative of the update because I think this is helpful. It's helpful to know where we stand. And to the extent we do have surplus, I think it's important to keep in mind that we have these you know, that we still have a lot of these issues in front of us, including the WPCA contamination, which is historical. And even some of these 40 sites were historical for that matter. But that's helpful. So, Mr. Curley, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, it's actually a comment, but I think everyone on this board likely agrees that we don't want to police or get involved in approving purchase orders and expenditures on a detailed basis. So I don't think anybody is interested in that role. I don't think that was the intention of the board. But you actually mentioned something that I actually wanted to mention. Before I was on this board, when this issue first came up, I remember watching and following the Board of Finance meetings, and I do recall Mr. Carey coming forward with the type of spending requests to be approved by this board. So coming onto the board last year, my understanding was that it was a two-step process, that if the board set money aside, it was going into an account that was designated, but it would still need an authorization to be spent. So I was surprised to learn that money was continuing to be spent without coming back for approval. But look, I was not on the board at the time when the decisions were made. I just think that we should consult with either bond counsel or the town attorney to make sure that we just don't have a legal problem. Because the last thing we want to do is have a legal problem when monies are being spent without authorization. So I support the idea of just looking into what the authorization states and making sure that it's legally correct. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Curley.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Ritol, I can't see
No,
the screen.
yeah,
Are there any other questions?
Ms. Leclerc had her hand up a few minutes ago. Just wanted to tell you that.
Ms. Leclerc?
I had a request from Mr. Bremer, and that is if we think some of the contamination at the WPCA is historical from the Nike sites, can we start researching brownfield grants and see if we'd be eligible for any of that?
Sure, absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
I seem to hear about them from time to time and think that that could be a good source of funds for us. And then what we were just talking about with Mr. Curley, I seem to remember we had two sources of buckets of funds for the fill pile in the beginning. I can't remember if it was contingency exactly, but in the early days, we had transferred money there, and then we had to move it out. And then at the end of June, when we had the fund balance, we set up a new fund strictly for the fill pile. And I think from there, we would transfer in it directly. Like they could just spend it because we had put it in there at the end of the year. But I could be wrong. But that's just my memory. So.
Thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Yeah, just, it's better to just like make sure we've got it right. So I appreciate that. Mr. Mottola?
Yeah, I just have a couple of follow-up questions. I'll be real quick. So Tom, just remind me, when you say the fill pile, are we talking about the berm too that was built? Or
Yes, we are talking about the
okay,
berm.
That
and-
includes that?
Right,
Okay.
it does.
All right, just wanted to make sure. And just the estimates that you're talking about, I'm going to ask a real obvious question. I'm assuming I know they're estimates, but you're getting those estimates from professionals?
Yes.
Right.
Our
okay.
LEP.
And you have backups for all that? I think that's going to be very important in the coming days for the Penfield issue too.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, just following up, I know there's probably some other sites here. I mean, wasn't there fill material, both at Gould Manor and Jennings School? That was fill material that we found was delivered to those sites. But then it turned up more historical contamination after that, so it really expanded the remediation at those sites, correct?
That's correct, and I'll just do a quick history of Gould Manor. We used Julian fill along the sidewalk.
Yes.
Right by the street. And so in testing that area and remediating that area, which was done a while ago, they discovered some more historical contamination. And what happens is when they discover more contamination, they keep testing until they don't find any contamination so that they know how big an area they have to remediate. And it just kept going on and on and on, and it ended up really extending right into the parking lots and throughout Gould Manor. So that's why we had to do what we did with Gould Manor.
Okay, all right. And on the town website regarding the contamination and fill pile and stuff, aren't numbers on there about how much we've spent and things like that?
I believe so, and I think.
I thought they were updated, correct?
Also, yeah, and this list, I said earlier, we could put dates. If you go on the town website, it'll show you progress on a per-site basis, now at least.
Okay. To Madam Chairwoman, you had mentioned dates maybe being put on the sheet, and I was just confused. Are you talking about the dates these things were completed? I just wanted to be clear what you're expecting.
I don't know if we need dates, honestly. I think I was just more trying to understand kind of the progress, as we get updates, if we've spent $500,000 or $1 million, what does that mean? It's just, we look at the schedule and we say, yep, okay, we spent this and that was spent on these 5 sites that were completed. Something very simple. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but, and maybe others feel differently, but for me, it wasn't as apparent, what was being done in town. So I think it's just helpful for everybody to understand how this is progressing and, and where the money's going. So whatever the easiest way to do that is fine.
Okay. And when I listened to yourself, Madam Chairwoman, and Mr. Curley on the spending authorizations, are you just talking about having one spending authorization for that, for example, the entire $9,885,000 that the administration is authorized to spend that money at whatever site they need to spend it on to basically remediate contamination in the town? Or are you looking, because Mr. Curley said he doesn't want to micromanage it, so I presume that he doesn't want to sit there and say, oh, you have to come to us regarding the barn at the shooting range, which is one of the 7 that's left.
No,
So I want to know, like, do we have to have big meetings about the barn at the shooting range?
No, my question, again, to put it simply, was we have talked frequently about the fact that we, this past, I believe it was October, set aside a bucket of money for Penfield / remediation, and that in order to use that money, it would come before us for a vote. So I thought, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, that the way we did that was we authorized a transfer. We did not authorize an appropriation. And I thought that the way we did that last October, so money for Penfield, which will in fact require a vote, was the same wording, the same form of authorization that we had used the year before. So in other words, I thought we had previously authorized a transfer, but not authorized an appropriation. So I just want to check on that to make sure that we are, that we've got the right thing in place. Because technically, if the wording was the same, why would we even have to have a vote on Penfield? We've already authorized it if that's what everybody believes. So that's what I'm trying to straighten out and understand, that we've got the right language in here and that we've done things appropriately and we kind of know where we are.
Okay.
Does that
I mean,
help?
I thought it was, I'm just saying, going back, like you mentioned, or someone mentioned, Brian Carey being before us and coming to us for money, that we'd found a pocket of money and that we put it into the same account. And then the administration could use that to pay expenses. And that's what I thought what we did when we put this first $9,885,000 in, was we got, we were starting to get numbers with estimates of $20 to $30 million. And I thought that's exactly what we did, was we put that money in and the administration could use that to pay for testing, for remediation work, or for whatever needed to be done to clean up these sites. So I'm just telling you that's what I believed happened.
No, and listen, there's no point in speculating. We have an authorization that was in an agenda and it's in minutes. And I think we should compare the two that we did and make sure that that what we believe we did is what we've got in place.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Testine.
I just want to echo some of Mr. Walsh's sentiments. I do have a couple just brief questions, and then I'll make some comments. But, Tom, on this other sheet, okay, about the 40, and I want to also congratulate you and the town for the amount of remediation efforts. There's the ones that have yet to be completed, St. Mortar, the 7 different, Mill Hill. There's a couple on here that, and Mr. Walsh just brought up the shooting range, happens to use the word completed, and then it says remediation needed, no, RAP submitted, not applicable, and it says completed, yes. So I'm a little confused about that and the trail. Are those two done? Are they not done? I'm just trying to.
The answer is easy. We don't change things to green until we're what I call done.
Done, okay.
And that means that we've filed everything, that DEEP is signed off on
So
everything. So we may not have to remediate, but we still need to file paperwork to get them to approve that, and that's the process that we're in.
So that's why it still says no under remediation needed, correct?
Specifically, there was 3 sites in the Holytown area. We tested these 2 sites. These 2 sites did not need remediation, which is why they are completed. The one at the barn did need remediation, which is why it's still.
So Mr. Walsh is concerned about the barn, since we talked about the barn, is a good one, right?
Well, when you see the RAP is submitted, and the RAP, that's the remediation action plan. That's what that means. So when we say no, that means that
remediation
paperwork
action plan. Okay, got it.
hasn't been filed yet.
Okay,
So that's why you see a bunch of no's there.
okay. And on the, Mr. Matola mentioned the cap, that I'm guessing you've already checked with DEEP and
We're still
whoever.
negotiating.
Okay, very good. Also, just to get back to this spending authorization conversation we're having, so I happen to have with me, and I'm sure you may recall this, Mr. Bremer, back from December 2nd of 2019, Madam Chair, there were already sites on here. In fact, I have it written down. We must have talked about it. This was, I believe, my first board meeting. 70 total sites that had to be investigated at that point in time. as of December 2nd of 2019, which was at the height of this initial fill pile scare or emergency, which Mr. Walsh used that word, I totally agree, because I'm sure if you asked residents, especially during that time, it would be considered an emergency. There was $774,525 encumbered to date. That's as of December 2nd of 2019. Then this, is a document that we were given as board members at that time. I'm sure the administration has it, or I'd be happy to share it, whatever. But there's different proposals, different costs that are associated, and different purchase orders that correspond to various dates, various proposals. This page, just to give you an idea, Gold Manor in itself, the fill pile piece of it alone, was 170. The estimated cost was 174,500. At Jennings, I believe it looked like we were just going to have to remediate the soccer fill pile. So just the soccer field alone was 99,168. I think you may have yourself, I believe, Mr. Bremer, right?
I think I did.
Yeah. So the total at that point in time, just for Gold Manor, Jennings School, Mill Hill Elementary, Osborne Hill Parking Area, Burroughs Road, Jennings Beach Playground, Dam Tennis Bubble, McKinley, Ludlow Courtyard, the estimated remediation cost just for those was $964,000. The tie and bond investigation cost at that point was $460,000. So the total estimated cost on December 2nd of 2019 was $1,425,056. Obviously, the work had already gone on and progressed at that point without spending authorization specific to each and every project. And again, to use Mr. term, we all deemed it, and the money had been set aside in the same account we're all just for the purposes of making sure that these efforts were taking place in a time to alleviate the concerns of residents, B, make sure the PCBs were addressed properly, and C, start to the trust of the residents who had been subjected to the obvious criminal investigations and subsequent court hearings that have all been reading about that were part of the prior administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from board members? Anyone?
Don't see any.
Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Bremer, thank you very much for putting together the summary and the analysis for us. I feel like this was helpful and a good memory jogger, and also that we should probably get in the habit of asking for an update more frequently. Maybe quarterly would be helpful so that we're not straining our memories as we are. But thank you again for all the work that you're doing. It's great to hear that we're ahead of schedule.
My pleasure.
I know all of us look forward to having the 40 sites behind us and the rest of this behind us as quick as humanly possible. So thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to item 8, which is to hear committee updates. If I know of a couple of committees that have met, the audit committee, the budget committee, and the purchasing policy committee. I don't know if there are any others, but maybe Mr. DeWitt, since you're attached to a couple of those, do you want to give some updates?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Budget committee met. We drafted and approved the budget hearings list for the budget hearings, the calendar for the budget hearings. We actually did it after the budget was published, so we didn't have to iterate it. And We've taken out a lot of the departments that had virtually no increases. So hopefully, what we're trying to do is, make this as short a process as possible, but with still getting all the information that we still need to make informed decisions. And most importantly, I think from the budget side is the Google sheet went out today. So Frank, who I think is on here tonight, Frank sent out the link to the Google sheet. If you haven't seen an email from Frank, please ask about that because it's very important. I tried logging in today, worked fine. I think I like the format a lot. I noticed the selectmen have already been using it and put their questions in there. I noticed that chairwoman has put her questions in there, and I would ask everyone to take a look at the budget book and make your inquiries through the budget the Google sheet. So Frank, thank you for doing that. I think that's great. Appreciate that. And that's it for budget committee. Purchasing policy committee. We had a meeting this morning, which I thought was very productive. We have a new purchasing director. Adam is his name. I have such a problem with his last name, and I don't know why. But
Adam Tulin.
Yes, thank you. I don't know why. I don't know what my brain freezes with his name, but seems like a nice guy. He seems to have a very good working relationship with Courtney Laborious from central office already, and we established a couple dates that I think are significant to this board. One is they're going to get together, and deliver a combined document to the purchasing policy committee on the end of the month. So the 31st, we're going to meet. We're going to see what that data looks like, and they will highlight wherever they have anything that needs reconciled, and we will certainly try to reconcile that, and whatever the purchasing policy committee cannot reconcile, we will bring to the board. And ultimately, we've set a final date for this to be done, which is July. So we would, in theory, vote on this in our June meeting, since we don't meet in July, even though I would recommend we have a special meeting to vote on this thing if it does have to go into July. And we got a couple interim meetings, April, May, just to kind of work through progress. But I was very happy with the meeting today, and if Mr. Brummer's still there, I thank him for his participation in that. And I think that's it for my committees. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Before we move to, I'll ask Mr. Mottola to give a brief update on audit committee, but any questions for Mr. DeWitt from the board? John, can you?
Sure, I'll go quick. We had a meeting in January. I was unable to attend, and that's when I was voted the chair of the committee. So
I hate when that happens, John.
So we had a meeting today. Joe Senafani came, and Connie Saxel. The purpose of having Joe here was just to go over the audit process in 2022 and see what we can do to maybe get a draft earlier. We usually would get one in December, and so the goal is by December 5th we have a meeting. We're gonna hopefully have a draft by then that we can review. And then Connie Saxel, I'm looking at my notes here, so I apologize, went through some of the outstanding audit items, the WPCA, the Register of Voters, and the WPCF issue, and gave us an update on those. And also the transfer station, and she's pretty satisfied that there's been compliance, and she's still gonna stay on top of the transfer station issue. John Cattell was here too. He's the deputy director of public facilities, and gave an explanation as to some of the things they're doing down there. So that was today's meeting. So, and that's really it. And I think our next meeting's not until June. Sure.
Just a question, John. I had planned on signing into your meeting today, but wasn't able to because I got held up in federal court.
Okay.
So I'm just going to review the videotape of the
Sure.
FairTV broadcast, and if I have questions, can we ask them at the end of a
Absolutely.
meeting?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yep.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right.
Madam
We move to,
Chairwoman, Madam Chairwoman, can
item-
I ask you a question
Yes.
quickly?
Of course.
And I'd meant to ask this or bring it up during our very first presentation in regards to the reappropriations. But in order to, I personally think, and I would hope that you would support it, request that our CFO, Jared, write to the Board of Education and Ms. Laborious about our discussion today about the reappropriation of the money, so they fully understand it and it's documented. Just about the 1.6 and that, just so that they don't, everyone's on the same page and knows, yeah, they're still got the same amount of money, but you're just getting a previous. I just don't want there to be confusion, and then sometimes there's confusion if sometimes the minutes are trying to be concise, but I just think for me, it's kind of a big issue that everyone be on the same page. And I've seen this happen before over my previous 20 years of experience on these boards, where we don't do something like this, a confusion sets in, and people think maybe they have more money now to spend. So would you support requesting through you, Mr. Schmidt, just a short email or something, somehow to document it, what transpired today? I mean, how do you feel about that, Madam Chairwoman?
Yeah, I guess I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I would just ask Mr. Schmidt, I mean, is this even on their radar screen? I feel like once we authorize their money, they don't kind of care what source the money comes from. They're authorized to spend it. So you tell me if you think it's necessary. I mean, I wouldn't think that this would even be part of what they look at or see, but to the extent it's going to cause confusion or they hear about it, it certainly wouldn't be a bad idea for you to write, but let us know what you think.
I'm happy to follow up with, what I'll do is I'll have a conversation with Courtney, and then, if it seems like there's something that requires clarification, I'm happy to put it in writing and to do that.
Just because sometimes their version of what they call their waterfall is different than what we call our waterfall. And there's some, they kind of look at what years theirs is more of a spending waterfall, I guess, as opposed to sometimes the bond amounts, and it could differ, and they might be confused actually by it. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the most helpful things that has been done in that regard through the working group is, and I know that they appreciate it too. I'm not sure they're thrilled about their $12 billion cap, but I do think they found it enormously helpful to have a number. So they know what their number is. They're planning around that number, and hopefully that brings clarity to this. I hope no one's confused that they think the 12 million turns into 13.6 as a result of this. But Jared, yeah, if you have that conversation, and if there's any, confusion at all, I think that Mr. Walsh's suggestion of putting something in writing is a fine one.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, if there's nothing else, take a motion to adjourn. All right, Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mr. Mottola. Thank you. Good night, everyone.